The main character named Charlie was lying in his bed and couldn't sleep because he was uncomfortable. He felt like he was cramped in this bed and his legs didn't fit. At some point he realized that he had been through all this and had ended up in this world of riders that was alien to him. Suddenly a girl appeared near his bed and demanded that he wake up immediately. When Charlie looked at her, she asked him with displeasure why he was still in bed at such an hour. She said that his aunt was not going to send a personal invitation for him to come to the kitchen. This girl was Julia, a third-year high school student, and also a second-rank martial artist. She was the top student in her school. When Charlie looked at her, he realized that this was the real horse standing in front of him. However, Julia did not like his words and she sharply shouted at the guy who angered her. She said that he had no right to call himself a child of the devil. While they were fighting in the room under the stairs, the woman was calmly preparing breakfast in the kitchen and did not pay attention to them. The woman's name was Natalie. She was 34 years old. She was a former wild horse of the Emperor, as well as a knight of the Order of the Centurion and a fighter of the 4th rank. When the boys came to the table, Natalie told her daughter that she should be nice to Charlie since he was, after all, her brother. But Julia said that she did not consider him her brother. She said that Charlie was their enemy, despite Natalie asking her not to say such things. Charlie thought to himself that Julia was right. According to the first owner's memories, he was not only their enemy. Moreover, he is the murderer of Natalie's husband, with whom he was now sitting at the same table. 11 years ago, the gates of the devil opened and hundreds of thousands of demons came out, bringing destruction. The entire empire united to drive the demons out of their homelands. And although the devil eventually retreated, he still left behind descendants. His descendant was the main character Charlie, a 16-year-old son of the devil and also a first-rank warrior. As he stood up from the table, a glass of water suddenly flew at him. Julia threw it and said that the empire should not have accepted bastards like him with open arms. The girl did not want to calm down, but Charlie did not react to her words in any way. At that moment, Natalie tried to calm her daughter down. When the protagonist returned to his room, he sat on his bed and began to think about the fact that he understood that Julia's aggression was revenge for the murder of her father. But he did not believe that she actually called him a bastard. No matter how much hatred people had for him, no one ultimately tried to deal with him directly. Now Charlie was worried about what to do next. He suspected that this time the system or something like that should wake up. As he covered his eyes with his hands, he felt his horns begin to pulsate, as if electricity was passing through them. At that moment, he heard a voice in his head that said that the system was activated. The guy jumped up from his seat in surprise and began to look around. Suddenly, a screen appeared in front of him, which said that the host could improve his skills by using the opponent's energy. However, at the moment he had no opponents. At some point, Charlie thought that this was really great news. He then walked out of the room and decided that now that he had such a system, he shouldn't do housework. At which point the system told him that Charlie in his past life died because he was beaten and then hospitalized in the hospital. He got into a fight with another patient, and the fight resulted in death from hypoxia. When the main character went out into the corridor, he looked around and realized that there was no one in the house except Aunt Natalie. He thought this was excellent news, because if Julia had been there, she would have certainly beaten him up. But his aunt would have given him only a scolding, so he decided to try to frighten her and at the same time try out the system. The guy approached the woman from behind and assumed a frightening pose, intending to take advantage of the element of surprise and scare her. However, Natalie was faster. She took the knife and put it to the main character's neck, because she felt his presence behind her. She asked what he was doing here, at which point the guy froze in place and couldn't utter a word. Then Natalie said that his help was not needed here now, so he needed to go and have a good rest. The system informed the protagonist that the girl felt extreme hatred towards him, which is why his energy grew steadily upwards. At that moment, he realized that this was the essence of the system. He also realized that Aunt Natalie hated him very much. Deciding not to argue with the girl, he bowed to her and decided to do as she said. He quickly headed to his room, which was under the stairs, before their collision led to something terrible. He locked himself in his room and began to think that this woman was absolutely abnormal. He felt such a high energy level, and now he understood that all this was because of him. He tried to understand who this woman really was, just crazy or a two-faced person. However, the hero realized that none of this mattered, since he had gained a lot of stats due to her strong hatred. So he decided that he would live by the principle that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. He then turned to the system and decided that he should increase his physical strength, but the system reported that he did not have enough energy points. As it turned out, the transition from level 22 to 23 costs a whole 1,000 points. Thus, with each level the cost of improvement increases, but the main character did not know where to get so much energy. He decided that perhaps it was worth appearing in front of his aunt more often, but he was afraid of how all this could end. Charlie then decided that he had no choice but to retreat, and went to his little sister's room. He opened the door and said that he would like to talk to her. However, he came at an unfortunate time, as Julia was changing her clothes at that moment. When she saw her half-brother on the threshold, she covered herself with clothes and screamed in indignation. At one point, Charlie blushed, but said that Julia had nothing to hide from him. He said that in fact, he had everything that she had. He showed her his muscles and informed her that his pectorals were actually bigger than hers. However, Julia did not appreciate his joke and attacked him, punching him in the stomach and wishing him dead. At this point, the system reported that malice had been used, which consumed some energy. Julia even got a little scared because she had hit the guy so hard. However, Charlie quickly came to his senses, cleared his throat, and said that this blow was too weak. He thought to himself that this was just what he needed. He realized that it was not in vain that he waited at the door until she began to change her clothes. These words made Julia even more angry, and she attacked Charlie with her fists, while the system kept confirming to the protagonist that malice had been used against him. Julia kicked him in the face, sending Charlie flying across the room, the system telling him that 500 units of energy had been consumed due to accumulated anger. As the protagonist lay on the floor, through a crack in the door, he saw Natalie's face, who asked him what he was doing in her daughter's room at such a late hour. Charlie watched as Natalie's extreme hatred for him grew before his eyes, and these indicators even scared him. Then he stood up carefully and said that he should go back to his room. He said goodbye to Julia and wished Natalie good night. After the woman entered the room, Julia assumed that Charlie was trying to play a joke on her. Meanwhile, the protagonist returned to his room and decided to try out his new skills on himself. He picked up a knife and stabbed himself in the stomach, but instead of piercing the flesh, the knife simply broke. The system also informed him that he was now a level 11 warrior. The next day he had to go to the school he attended. He collected his things and headed towards the building. When he found himself in the middle of his classmates, the system began to go off the scale with the number of notifications about the host being extremely hated. At that moment, he realized that this place was the epicenter of energy that would help him improve. Then he turned to his classmates and showed them the middle finger. He decided that he could rely on the education of his loyal comrades and on the fact that they would not suppress their feelings. His plan worked, and the system began to endlessly inform him about the increase in his strength due to the hatred felt towards him. Then Charlie realized that this was not just a school, but a real energy field for him. Julia, who was watching everything that was happening, did not understand what had happened to her brother, since he used to hate going to school, but now he looked extremely excited. Meanwhile, Charlie walked into the school with a smile on his face when someone called out to him from behind. When he turned around, he saw Chelsea, his homeroom teacher, and also the teacher, the goddess of the high school. Behind him, she was surprised that Charlie had finally come to school and asked him how he was feeling, since she heard that he was a little sick. The protagonist turned to the girl to answer her. But at that moment, he felt that his energy increased by 55. He thought that Chelsea was just pretending, and also really hated him. However, when he turned around, he saw his disgruntled male classmates behind him and realized that this time it was a matter of male jealousy. Then he decided to take advantage of the moment and, as if by accident, fell right on Chelsea, saying that in fact everything was fine. But the girl thought that since he could not stand on his feet, he still felt bad, and said that she would take him to the infirmary. The protagonist continued to lie on his teacher, while the other students froze with their mouths open, not believing that he had allowed himself such liberty. Then Charlie looked up and told Chelsea that the whole thing was because he was pining for love. When his classmates heard this, their hostility towards him increased manifold, and then the protagonist realized that his plan was actually working. After school, he went to the garden and sat down on a bench, deciding that he would wait for Julia here. He also thought that he had collected a lot of energy today, and school was not as bad as he had thought before. While he was sitting quietly on the bench, his classmates ran up to him from behind with a huge bag in their hands and decided to attack their hated classmate. They tried to put a bag over his head, but Charlie wasn't scared. He decided that the punching bags came to him on their own, and decided to practice a couple of new tricks on them. Even though he couldn't see anything, he attacked one of the attackers with his knee right in the face. A real fight broke out between the guys, while Julia watched everything that was happening from behind a wall that was located not far from the scene. She took a closer look and recognized the guy with the bag over his head as her half-brother Charlie. However, what she saw made her very angry because she believed that no one except her could beat him. So she decided to intervene. However, the girl did not take into account that Charlie could not see who was attacking him, and so soon his fist flew into her face. At that moment, the main character realized that he seemed to hear Julia's voice. He decided that the girl had come to his aid. The blow was so strong that Julia flew to the other side and fell face down on the asphalt. After the fight, the main character stood triumphantly over his attackers, took off his bag, and exhaled. Then he saw his half-sister Julia standing to the side, and realized that he was not mistaken when he assumed that he heard her voice. He realized that she did not want to allow anyone else to beat him, considering that this was exclusively her privilege. After that, he immediately ran up to the girl, hoping that Aunt Natalie would not find out about what happened, otherwise she would kill him. He began to shake Julia from side to side, saying that he would take revenge on her. At that moment, the system informed him that the energy had been increased by 5. Charlie realized that Julia, apparently, did not hate him as much as he thought, because not only did she save him, but she also emitted much less hatred than his classmates. Realizing this, the main character let out a tired breath, realizing that Julia was an unusual girl. He picked her up, put her on his back and walked towards their house, since at the moment, Julia could not walk on her own. As it turned out, his life became much calmer in the following days. They returned home, and Julia told her mother that she was a little distracted by training, so she missed a couple of punches, because of which she got bruises. In addition, Charlie worked hard to get extra energy points. He fueled self-hatred among his classmates by constantly pestering his teacher, Chelsea. He interfered with the love affairs of his classmates, constantly setting them up in front of each other. He even went to the principal to tell him that his mother's hair loss remedy had been delivered, and he had kindly picked it up for him. It was the day of religion for the North County High Schools, which was the senior competition. But when Charlie arrived at school, he realized that there was no one there. He didn't know what was going on, and assumed that classes were canceled today. Then he suddenly heard loud voices coming from somewhere on the other side. He looked towards the next room, which was next to the school, and realized that all the students were there. This could not but please him, and he decided that now they would all be at his disposal. Meanwhile, a fight was taking place in this room. There was an arena where students competed. As it turned out, one of the participants was Julia. When Charlie walked inside, he saw his half-sister there, and at first assumed that her opponent was unlucky to have gotten her. However, when he looked closer, he saw that his sister was losing. When he realized that someone had thrown her high into the air, and Julia was literally a centimeter away from falling, he ran to her. Charlie managed to catch Julia in his arms, and when he looked closely at her, he realized that her face was bruised, and she was breathing heavily. He looked up and saw the fighter she'd been fighting standing in the arena. A young man with blonde hair and a long maroon cloak. This guy's name was Ben. He was the heir to the White Dog firm. When he looked at Julia, who was on the verge of losing consciousness, he laughed and called her weak for the daughter of a knight of the Centurion Order. He found it very funny, and then turned to the teacher, saying that it was time to announce that he was now the representative of the third class of the high school. At that moment, Charlie was puzzled as to how this could happen. He didn't know how such a strong woman like Julia could get such a serious injury from her peer. He remembered the events that had happened that morning. Julia had told her mother that she was going out on business. Charlie, noticing her unusual costume, asked if today was some special day. He laughed and suggested that Julia had dressed up as a police officer to cause a stir at school. However, the girl simply walked past him and told him not to poke his nose into her business. She laughed and added that Charlie, apparently, was the only one in the school who did not know anything. The guy did not understand what she was talking about, but the girl asked him not to focus on it, saying that he would find out about everything later. She also stated that after today, she would be able to join the Knights. At this point, Charlie thought about what he clearly remembered. Aunt Natalie had stopped her age restrictions, so he didn't understand why she suddenly agreed to this. Soon, Julia arrived for the final round of class representative selection. Chelsea told the participants to remember that friendship should always come first, and competition second. After that, she announced that the final fight for the title of class representative in the tournament among senior students of the Northern District was beginning. She introduced the first participant, the heir of the head knight, and a second-year high school student named Julia. She then introduced the second participant, the heir to the White Dog Company, a second-year high school student named Ben, and then wished both participants good luck. As soon as the battle began, Julia immediately took up her sword and rushed to attack. Ben thought he could easily block her blow, but the girl flew through him, and he barely had time to put his shield in front of him to turn away from her blow. When he realized that Julia had no intention of slowing down, he immediately decided to use the magic armor. Meanwhile, the girl stabbed Ben in the back with her sword, hoping that the blow would knock him down, but it had no effect. Instead, Ben turned and attacked Julia, knocking her down and throwing her away from him. He realized that now was his perfect opportunity to attack her, and then laughed, asking if she really thought she could surpass the future knight in speed. However, Julia was not going to give up. She broke his armor and said that he was hoping for victory in vain. She then decided to attack him from above using a move called the Mounted Knight Strike. The impact was so devastating that Ben was pinned to the ground, lying on the floor coughing heavily, with clouds of smoke and dust swirling around him. Julia stood over him with a smile on her face and put her sword to his neck, saying that the winner had already been determined. Chelsea immediately approached her and said with a smile that she was ready to announce the winner. However, before she could say Julia's name, the girls heard a strange sound behind them, and at some point Julia tensed up. She didn't have time to react in time, and Ben immediately ran up to her. He punched her in the back, causing her to fly out of the ring. When the girl fell to the floor, Ben smiled triumphantly and said that victory was his. As it turned out, Chelsea had come to Natalie's house shortly before, and told her that she wanted to remove Ben from the fight. But the school said that the competition would take place the day after tomorrow. Therefore, the teacher did not allow this to happen, and the only thing she could do was to transfer Julia to another educational institution at her request. She apologized to Natalie, addressing her as Centurion, and said that Julia had to win this duel. When Natalie heard the teacher address her, she said that this glorious title had been banned from being uttered 10 years ago, so she shouldn't have done it either. She then decided to return to the conversation about her daughter and said she assumed Chelsea had done everything she could to help her. Hearing this, the teacher objected, saying that the school was to blame for everything 10 years ago. If it weren't for their regiment that fought so desperately on the battlefield, they wouldn't have been able to count on a peaceful sky above their heads. She knew those times were long gone, but Julia remembered it all. So Chelsea promised that if she took the position of class representative, she would do everything to make Julia a part of the order. However, Natalie also knew that her daughter had failed and had ended up in hospital with a broken leg. After that, she thanked Chelsea for telling her everything. But the woman noted that it was already quite late, and therefore she needed to go home. Chelsea did not argue with her, got up from the couch, and headed for the exit. At that moment, Charlie came out of his room, turned to the teacher, and said that he would like to see her off. As they walked down the street, Chelsea thanked Charlie for keeping her company, and the protagonist decided to ask her if Ben would really be the senior representative. The teacher replied that if no one could defeat him by tomorrow afternoon, then he would indeed become a representative. Judging by her appearance, she didn't like it either. But she couldn't change it. She then asked Charlie why he was interested in this, to which the hero replied that he was simply worried about his comrades. Images of his stepsister being defeated on the battlefield by this guy flashed through his mind, as well as her words about how she really wanted to win. So he smiled evilly, and told the teacher that he hoped this would help their classes become more united. The next day, the students started classes again. Ben sat at his desk and looked very happy. His classmates kept looking at him. One of them looked askance. It didn't bother him. He knew that once the competition was over and he took his position, the best universities would start a bloody fight to get him. He was sure that the day would come when he would be at the very top and have everything he wanted. Then he would not care about his classmates, who were never his competitors anyway. At that moment, the main character entered the office and loudly slammed his fist on the classroom door. He turned to the students sitting inside and asked if their so-called heir was there. At that moment, Ben realized that Charlie was talking to him, and a surprised grimace appeared on his face. He jumped up from his seat, slammed his fists on his desk, and asked Charlie what kind of a damn loser he was, at which point the system informed the protagonist that his energy had been increased by 120 due to the hostility Ben felt towards him. Then Charlie told him that he could call him whatever he wanted, and from these words the system kept sending him messages about increasing energy. The protagonist approached the guy and said that he came to challenge him and waited for him to agree. Meanwhile, Ben replied that their levels were very different, and when he heard the proposal for a fight, a smug smile appeared on his face. He was confident that defeating this guy would not be difficult for him, and so he immediately agreed. As soon as he gave his answer, Charlie grabbed him by the hair and slammed his head down on the desk with all his might, saying that he had formally challenged him to a fight, and therefore he should bow politely. He pressed Ben down on the desk with all his might and eventually made him an obedient little dog, which increased his energy by 621. After a while, the guys went to the training ground. When Chelsea heard what was happening, she couldn't believe it, because Charlie was level 1.1 and he dared to challenge a student with level 2.7. She was sure that Charlie would just die. But the students said that the guys had already entered the ring. The teacher understood that only fighters end up in the ring. She has no right to stop them. She can help a participant only if the situation is completely dire. Meanwhile, Charlie and Ben were already preparing for the fight. Ben said that Charlie should take into account that later, it would be too late to fall on his knees and beg him for forgiveness. He pointed at the main character and said that he didn't even have a combat uniform. He assumed that he simply couldn't afford it. However, Charlie only chuckled at his talkativeness and asked Ben if he considered himself worthy of being treated with respect and decency. These words made the student very angry, and he put his weapon and shield in front of him, calling upon a skill called Life Force Flow. He rushed at Charlie, saying that from the moment he hit him, he could consider himself a corpse. He thought to himself that he had both offensive and defensive skills, and he was even able to hold his own against Julia, so he was confident that he could handle this in no time. However, before he could strike Charlie, the latter attacked him in return, smashing his weapon with one blow of his fist. After that, Charlie didn't hesitate, and with his second fist struck Ben right in the chest, causing him to fly into the opposite wall. The students watched everything that was happening in surprise. They did not expect such an outcome of events. Chelsea was also surprised, because she was sure that Charlie would not succeed. Meanwhile, the protagonist continued to strike his opponent one blow after another, saying that in his next life, he needs to be more humane. At this point, Chelsea finally decided to intervene and told Charlie to stop because he was already crossing the line. She said that he was already considered the winner, so he did not need to continue the battle. She said that if Charlie didn't stop, he would simply kill Ben, and then his aunt and sister would face a military tribunal. She realized that Charlie didn't even hear her, and then she came close to him, putting her hand on his shoulder. At that moment, Charlie almost hit the teacher, because he was very carried away by the battle with his opponent. He finally came to his senses, looked again at Ben, who was already lying unconscious, and realized that he really should listen to Chelsea's words. The teacher thanked him for his trust, and then asked the doctors to take Ben. She thought to herself that the white dogs would definitely want to figure this out, and considering who Charlie was, it would be easy to figure this out. So she decided to do what she thought was right in this situation, and approached the protagonist, asking if he wanted to become a senior class representative. After some time, Chelsea was called into the director's office. When she arrived, the man was already sitting there surrounded by two of his colleagues. Principal Lee, who was a tiger, turned to the teacher and asked her what she thought of Charlie's actions. The girl said that she considered his behavior to be completely justified, since it was Ben who was the first to break the rules and attack Julia. Then Deputy Director Lou, who was a deer, approached her and asked the girl if she really thought that this circumstance gave him the right to beat a person. Then the second Deputy Director Ian, who was a sheep, intervened in the conversation. He asked what the problem was. After all, Ben could beat someone, but he considered himself untouchable. The man was very tense about such double standards. Lee then said that they must not forget that Charlie was a special student, and that if they found him innocent, it could cause a public outcry. But Charlie decided not to back down from her point of view, and said that she had a proposal on this matter. She showed him her hand, which had the mark of Charlie's fingers on it, and told him that he should be the senior class representative. At that moment, Ian jumped up from his seat and asked Chelsea if Charlie had threatened her. He said that the girl was a great warrior, and he couldn't believe that she was threatened by the students. Chelsea responded that when she tried to bring the boy back to his senses, he grabbed her arm so hard that it left a mark. She was sure that a normal first-level warrior would not have been able to get past her defense. She stated that she felt that Charlie was special, and he was quite worthy of representing their school. Jan replied to her that in that case it was necessary to make it an official statement as soon as possible, so that the white dogs would not create additional problems for them, and that the matter could be considered closed. Finally, Chelsea said that Charlie's victory could not be cancelled in any case, and therefore the white dogs would come to them in the near future anyway, so she wished the directors patience. At this point, the men began to seriously think that this girl was using them for her own purposes. A few hours later, as expected, Ben came into the principal's office with his father, and Natalie was also sitting opposite them with her daughter Julia. Lee greeted everyone present and said that the reason he had gathered them here today should be clear to everyone, so they should get straight to the point. Natalie remained calm, but when Julia saw Ben beaten, she couldn't help but laugh. Ben himself looked very depressed. He had several broken bones, as well as huge bruises on his face. His father looked even more gloomy, realizing that his son had tarnished his honor. At this point, Julia couldn't help but laugh, pointing her finger at Ben and asking if Charlie had really beaten him up that badly. Then the president of the White Dogs company named John turned to Natalie and said that he respected her contribution on the battlefield. He also said that his son would like to ask for forgiveness from her and his daughter, so they could ask for anything, money, equipment, and even elixirs, but in return they asked to give them Charlie. However, the woman, with a smile on her face, said that she could not give them Charlie because she needed him too. When John realized that the woman did not want to negotiate with him, he decided to point out that he respected her only because of her old exploits. He also stated that if they didn't hand over this little bastard named Charlie to him voluntarily, he would simply hire someone to deal with him. Then he asked Natalie how it happened that 10 years ago she was the only one who managed to survive, and the existence of her order became only nominal. At that moment, Julia realized that she was very angry at this attitude towards her mother and her order, and angrily asked John what he was trying to pretend to be. After this, she jumped up from her seat and intended to hit John, ordering him to close his mouth. However, at that moment Natalie stopped her, placing her hand on her shoulder. She asked John if she could regard his words as a direct threat to a member of the family of representatives of the knightly order. At this moment, surprise and even fear appeared on the faces of all the directors, because the situation was heating up, and everyone felt that it was about to get out of control. John was also scared and tried to justify himself by saying that it wasn't true, and then added that Charlie was a demon and not a member of her family. At this point, Ian thought that Natalie seemed to really appreciate this guy. It was known to all that the Knights of the Order, if their loved ones were in danger, were ready to kill even the king himself in order to save them. This was especially true for Raymond, the deputy head of the Knights of Storm, who heard that he and Natalie had something personal in the past. Then the woman and her daughter headed for the exit, saying that since they had no other solution to the problem, they had nothing more to do here. Finally, John told her not to forget that Charlie is not that simple. He stated that this guy is not part of her family because he is a demon, and one day he will go crazy and kill everyone. Natalie replied that she had made a bet with a man on whether Charlie would awaken his true nature and become a monster. When Ian heard this, he assumed the man was betting that Charlie would go crazy. However, Natalie proudly stated that it was she who had bet on this outcome of events, and then added that if this happens, she will sort everything out. Meanwhile, the main character was riding on the bus and suddenly sneezed. He thought that someone was remembering him, and then he became angry that the teacher sent him here without saying a word, and did not even ask for consent to participate. He noticed that there was a girl sitting on the next bus, wiping her sword and looking quite worried. When she noticed Charlie looking at her from the next bus, a look of fear appeared on her face. Charlie, noticing this, smiled. He remembered that many considered him a bull because one of his horns was broken. When he saw the fear on her face, he decided to tease her a little. He pressed himself against the glass, made a terrifying smile, and told the girl that he really was a demon who was hiding his true power in order to one day destroy everyone. He laughed and jokingly began to extol the demon race, causing her sword to fall from her hands and the girl to begin to cry in fear. She immediately ran to her parents and told them to stop the bus immediately because demons were following them, and they were already very close. Because of this, the bus went off the track and almost crashed into a pole. Meanwhile, the protagonist felt his energy increasing in a huge way due to the hostility that this girl felt. It was a very pleasant feeling, as if he was reaping a harvest with each new source of hostility. Soon they arrived at the competition arena. Hundreds of students had already gathered there. The host greeted them and said that the competition was about to begin, and they needed to take their places. When Charlie got off the bus, the first thing he noticed was that there were a lot of people there. But for him, this was good news, because he knew that he would be able to gather energy in huge quantities. At that moment, he felt how hostility from some person began to grow towards him again. This feeling seemed familiar to him. When he looked towards the building, he saw Natalie there, and Julia, who was standing next to her. He assumed that his aunt had found out about what Ben had done and had decided to be kind to him, and Charlie decided that he should repay her for such a wonderful gift in due course. So, upon seeing his family, he immediately showed his middle finger to his half-sister. Julia got a little angry and made a displeased face, which only increased the main character's energy by 2. Charlie was only glad about this, because the anger of the people around him only made him stronger. Meanwhile, the host announced that the high school league competition had officially started. These competitions, like other similar events, are supported by 123 companies and respected knightly orders, so 24 knightly regiments arrived here as honorary observers. The presenter pointed to the stands where those very knights were standing, watching what was happening with serious faces. As soon as they heard themselves being introduced, they began to beat their chests with their fists, shouting about valor and justice. After this, the other knightly regiments rose from their places and shouted their mottos. When the audience saw this, they had a look of delight on their faces, because they had never seen knights in real life before. After that, the host announced that humans and werewolves are one. Together they are strong, and their strength is in unity. He also hoped that the participants would lead their country to a brilliant future, and then announced that they needed to welcome the 1,358 students who came here to participate in the competition. The main character watched everything that was happening with interest. When he realized that other participants were about to enter the arena, he decided that this would be a great opportunity to earn more energy. Soon, the host announced that each participant would have 5 minutes to introduce themselves, and asked them to remember that the entire continent was watching them. After this, the participants began to enter the arena one by one to greet all the people gathered. They shouted that they wanted to become famous and elevate the human race so that it would become invincible. Soon it was Charlie's turn to take the stage, and as soon as he got to the podium, he immediately gave everyone present the middle finger, calling them scum. At that moment, Julia felt truly ashamed of her half-brother and decided to pretend that she did not know him. The principal turned to Chelsea and asked her if she thought Charlie was being over the top, and the teacher suggested that he might be, but decided not to intervene. After this, the host announced that they should begin to announce the rules of the competition. He said that this time all the participants would go to Nova Island for a whole week. They will be provided with food for the first 3 days, but when it runs out, they will have to get provisions on their own. He also announced that tens of thousands of monsters had been released onto the island. Vicious beasts from the Demon Gate, true killing machines, divided by strength into levels 1 to 5. The monsters' bodies were already covered with special energy balls. The more balls a participant collected, the higher his final rating would be. After this round, the top 100 students will be selected to take part in the final battle in the arena. The achievements of their scientists are balls that are capable of not only showing participants live, but also saving their lives at critical moments. He also hastened to announce that students who used the help of this miracle of technology would be disqualified, since their belts reflect their physical condition at a given moment in time. Once their condition worsens, the ball will carry them to a safe place, which is also a reason for disqualification. After the host explained the rules, he turned to the participants again and asked them to prepare to leave for the island. A tall man approached him, using a skill that was supposed to transport all the students to the island. When the boys raised their heads, they saw that a huge transparent dome had appeared above them, which seemed to be trying to take them to another space. The next moment transported the guys to a completely different place. They found themselves on a plane that was flying to the right place. Charlie thought to himself that this technology was really quite unusual. At that moment, he heard people on the plane start screaming that there was a demon on board with them. When he turned to look at the rest of the people on board, he realized that they were apparently talking about him. Without thinking twice, the guys immediately rushed at Charlie, saying that they would not let this demon live. At this point, Natalie and Julia were watching everything that was happening through the screen. The girl asked her mother if she thought Charlie would be able to get into a good position, but Natalie was adamant that he would not succeed. Julia asked her why she thought so, since he was quite strong and even she was not equal to him. Natalie replied that no matter how strong Charlie was, his efforts were in vain. Since they should not forget where they were, their region has been fighting demons for thousands of years. She said that the other players would not allow him to take a good position in this environment, which was filled with hatred towards demons. And Julia thought to herself that Charlie was often different from other demons, and he was not as bad as people thought. The girl looked again at the screen where her half-brother was shown, who was currently participating in the battle, and she wished him luck. At that moment, several participants attacked Charlie at once. They decided to cut off his head and sacrifice him to the fallen warriors. But at that moment, the main character said that he was joking and was not really a demon. Then one of the attackers kicked him in the head and said that he needed to kill this guy first to get rid of the competitor. Charlie realized that he couldn't stand these attacks and hit the guy in the face with his hand in return. He easily dealt with the rest of the attackers and then went to the backpack that one of them dropped. He asked not to think badly of him. After this, he turned to those who attacked him and said that they were all just disgusting. The next moment, his energy increased to incredible proportions as the participants felt extreme hatred towards him. Charlie decided not to hesitate and with a punch smashed the plane they were flying on, causing everyone to fall into the resulting hole. But he was prepared for the fall, since he had already put on a parachute. At this point, everyone watching was shocked. They watched in amazement as several participants were disqualified at once due to being in danger, and the rescue balloon carried them to another location. Meanwhile, the main character calmly descended to the ground with the help of a parachute, thinking that this ball turned out to be very useful. Soon he found himself in an arena which was a mountainous area. He carefully descended on a parachute and soon his feet touched the ground. When Julia saw this, her face showed delight and joy for her brother. But John was extremely annoyed by this event. It seemed like he literally lost consciousness when he realized that this guy was able to defeat the elite of their school, and he himself remained unharmed. At this point, Julia heard the rest of the audience say that this guy would now be finished, since the third-level Ghost Bull had taken notice of him. Meanwhile, the main character stood in the middle of the field and did not even suspect that there was an animal behind him. He thought about the fact that the nearest warehouse with resources was 27 kilometers away. He began to look around, noting that this place was rather unpleasant. Meanwhile, the bull began to get angry. Steam came out of his nostrils and he headed straight towards Charlie. At that moment, Julia mentally begged him to pay attention to the bull approaching him and to be extremely careful with it. While the main character was examining the area, 2 bulls were already approaching him, ready to pounce on him at any second. At that moment, Charlie felt his whole back start to itch. He cursed under his breath and tried to figure out where all these insects came from. When he turned around, the bulls that were supposed to attack him were already unconscious, and the main character did not even notice the moment when he managed to defeat them. At that moment, the directors were sitting in the assembly hall and were shocked. It seemed to them that this guy had not been so strong before. But now everything said the opposite. Then Lee turned to his deputies and asked if they had any ideas. He thought to himself that this child was raised by Natalie, a hero, so it was no surprise that he was so strong, but he wanted to test him first. Meanwhile, Charlie decided to have a snack, and for this he used some strange red ball. When the deputies and teachers saw this, shock appeared on their faces. They could not believe that he was actually eating energy balls, because this was a key item for completing the mission. Charlie noted that the thing was very tasty, and then leaned over to the bull and thought that the meat would be of no use to him anyway, since he didn't know how to cook. After he had refreshed himself, he rose to his feet and decided it was time for him to start earning points. In order to do this, he needed to increase his energy, and to achieve this, he went to the bear's den and stole 2 cubs from the mother bear. After that, he climbed a rock and used the eagle's egg to make himself an omelet. At this point, the audience was extremely shocked by this behavior, as this guy seemed to have no thought whatsoever about his own safety. While Charlie was enjoying his dangerous adventures, he suddenly saw dog ears in the grass and thought that he had never had a dog before. He immediately rushed to the part of the clearing where the ears were, intending to catch the puppy and take it for himself. However, when he pulled the creature by its ears, he realized that it was not a puppy, but a little girl dog with dog ears, who cried in pain as Charlie pulled her by her body parts. When Charlie realized it was a man, he screamed in horror and immediately removed his hands from the girl. At that moment, 3 more girls with dog ears appeared in front of him. Their names were Evelyn, Christina, and Lena. They were the older sisters of this little dog. They realized that their little sister was trapped and rushed to help her. When they arrived at the scene, they saw a strange picture. Their little sister was lying on the grass, and Charlie was towering over her, and it all looked very suspicious. Moreover, the girl was crying loudly and calling her sisters for help, so the girls, as soon as they saw this picture, immediately became furious, and their eyes glowed red. They immediately rushed to the attack, intending to save their little sister. At this point, Charlie tried to justify himself. He stood up and said that it was not at all what they thought, and there was simply a misunderstanding between them. The youngest of the 5 dogs, named Coco, sat on the grass and cried bitterly. Her older sister Lena approached her, and then drew attention to the paid hero, saying that he was quite good. However, her sister Christina was not so friendly and wished death on the main character. The oldest of all present, Evelyn, noted that they understood everything perfectly well and realized that this was a misunderstanding. Then the surprised Charlie asked them why they beat him up in that case, because if it weren't for his little brother, he would have died long ago. At that moment, the girls realized that they had seen this guy before, but it was much more interesting to watch him in person than on the screen. At that moment, Evelyn realized that this was the same guy who had been provocative during the competition. However, the main character did not pay attention to them. He showed them a snake and a crocodile and asked the girls if any of them could cook. Evelyn was confused as she didn't know how to cook, but Christina and Lena said they knew a little about it. Coco was excited as she really wanted to take part in the cooking. She immediately took a knife in her hands and began to cut the snake into thin pieces. Meanwhile, Evelyn was busy with seasonings and sprinkling the meat of the killed animals with herbs for flavor. When the main character looked at the girls, he had the impression that he was on some kind of cooking show. In his opinion, the girls tried so hard that he thought that when they opened the lid, he would see food made of real gold. However, when the cooking was completed, he saw a terrible mess, in the middle of which the crocodile's head was sticking out. He did not understand how the cooking could be correct, and the result like this. Moreover, the system said that this crocodile was angry at the way it was cooked, much more than at the moment when Charlie killed it. At this point, the girls approached him and asked why he wasn't eating, to which Charlie replied that if he tried the dish, he would be committing suicide. However, the girls insisted and said that they were used to feeding guests first, so Charlie had to try their dish. To this, the main character replied that there were a lot of them here. This crocodile was so small and there was absolutely nothing to eat in it. Moreover, he did not feel hungry, so he refused to eat and suggested that the girls try it themselves. An argument ensued between them, and no one wanted to try the disgusting crocodile dish. At that moment, they heard a voice behind them. The girl turned to Charlie and ordered him to let her sisters go. Before the protagonist could do anything, he saw a sword fly past him, knocking the cup of green liquid out of his hands. When he looked at the place where the sword came from, he saw another girl approaching him. She spun around as she went, and, having come close enough to the main character, jumped up, preparing to strike. The girls recognized her as their older sister Camilla, but they did not expect that she would come to their aid. The protagonist realized that he had nothing to defend himself with, and so at the last moment he grabbed Coco by her hood and put her in front of him, thereby making her his living shield. At the last moment, the girl managed to turn her sword to the side so that it would not hit her younger sister. It only slightly cut off the fur from her tail. When she realized that this villain was using her little sister as a shield, rage appeared on her face, and the protagonist felt how this girl's hostility towards him was growing. Meanwhile, Coco continued to wave her arms, ordering Charlie to let go of her, and he eventually threw the girl aside. The sisters barely managed to catch their crying little sister and asked her if she was okay. Charlie looked at the girls and noted that they all had huge ears that hung down at the sides. He assumed that they were definitely not dachshunds. When Camilla heard this, she cursed at Charlie, calling him a one-horned devil. She said that she would not tolerate his bullying towards them. She then pointed her sword at him again, and began to threaten him that she would tear off his horns for his words. At this point, Charlie felt outraged, and while dodging the attacks, he tried to explain to Camilla that her sisters were trying to poison him. However, the girl did not pay attention to this. She turned to her sisters and told them to group together. When Charlie saw that 5 girls were attacking him at once, he realized that this did not look like a fair fight, but like some kind of gangster showdown. He stood near a large tree when the girls surrounded him, but he had no intention of giving up. He tore the tree out of the ground by its roots and began to swing the trunk around himself, throwing away the girls who were attacking him. Camilla realized that this guy was very powerful and her sisters couldn't handle him, so she had to do it herself. Then she spun her sword and started cutting the wood. Charlie noted that Camilla was acting like a pencil sharpener. Soon she had sharpened the tree until one end was incredibly sharp, and then Charlie decided that he needed to find a way to stop her. So he rushed at the girl, holding the trunk in his hand. At that moment, Camilla held her sword out in front of her and plunged it right into the sharp part that Charlie wanted to hit her with. However, at that moment she realized that her sword was stuck in a tree. Charlie stopped and asked her if she really thought she could compete with him. Then he decided that he was tired of talking, and now he would just deal with her. He threw the trunk away from himself with all his might, and it flew off in the other direction, along with Camilla. However, the girl was not going to give up, and at that moment she used a technique called Earth Strike. She put her hands in front of her and sent several dozen stones towards Charlie. at which point the main character realized that he had definitely not been warned about this. However, he also had no intention of giving up. He rose to his feet and blocked the blows with his hands. Moreover, he repelled all the attacks, and all the stones flew back at Camilla. At this moment, Julia, who was watching what was happening, was extremely surprised, because she knew that Camilla was at level 3. Natalie noted that such an indicator at her age is rare, and this girl has a great future. Julia saw the soil flying away at an insane speed, leaving behind large amounts of damage. These clods of earth were like bullets. Meanwhile, the fight between Charlie and Camilla continued. They were at the limit of their strength, but still trying to stand on their feet. The girl was surprised that Charlie was able to resist. She assumed that it was because he was the child of the devil. She couldn't believe that this guy was completely invulnerable. She had heard that the demons on the other side didn't react to such attacks, but she didn't think that Charlie was capable of such a thing either. Meanwhile, the protagonist thought to himself that these girls' powers were truly deadly, and he must not let her attack him again. So, without thinking, he rushed forward, deciding that in this case he would attack her in close combat. Camilla visibly tensed as she knew she couldn't let him get close enough to attack her. She pushed off the ground with all her might, raised her hands up, and a huge stone wall appeared in front of her, protecting her from attacks. However, the main character was stronger. It was not difficult for him to jump over the wall and rush straight to the girl at great speed. However, Camilla was ready to confront him, and when she saw him approaching her, she sent boulders towards him. Charlie realized that he had to deal with the things she was throwing at him first, so he broke tree trunks in mid-air with his kicks. When he tore off the tree trunk, he spun it in the air and directed it upward so that the trunk collided with the boulders. Camilla realized that this guy wanted her to be distracted by the smoke, and at that time Charlie would engage in hand-to-hand combat with her. However, she understood that he was mistaken, because he did not take into account that she was a dog, and therefore she was absolutely immune to such tricks. Camilla smiled, turned towards where Charlie was standing, and said that she would definitely catch him now. However, at that moment, Charlie appeared behind her and grabbed her by the neck, smiling as he said that she had lost. The spectators watching the whole thing noted that it was unfair play, and that Charlie was simply using one of his tricks. They believed that he should be called for such dirty tricks. The only one who seemed happy about what was happening was Julia. She shouted words of support to her brother. Meanwhile, her mother was thinking that maybe this Charlie was stronger than she thought. The thing is, he had plenty of opportunities to do something about Julia when she irritated him before, but he didn't do anything. Natalie took a closer look at Charlie, who was currently sitting by the fire, and began to think that this guy might not be like the other demons. When their fight was over, Charlie showed Camilla a plate with a dinosaur head sticking out of it, saying it was proof that her sisters wanted to kill him. However, Camilla said that she thought his devilish digestive system could handle it, and that looks could often be deceiving. When Charlie heard these words, his face became furious, and he said that in that case he would be happy to watch the girls eat this dish. The girls immediately began to protest. Camilla thought to herself that it was definitely not edible, since she, like no one else, knew that her sisters did not cook the best. So she decided to switch Charlie's attention to something else. She said she knew where they could get something that might be edible. However, the main character did not want to listen to her and simply silently poured the contents of the cup into her mouth. When the girl fell to the ground and her sisters began to worry for her life, at that moment, Charlie realized that he should have listened to Camilla. Maybe she really did know where to get food. On the third day, a helicopter arrived on the island with boxes of food, and the couriers sat down near the fire to catch their breath. The guy suggested that his colleagues eat shashlik because when it's cold, it's not that tasty. However, at that moment something quickly rushed past them and snatched the food from their hands. When the courier girl raised her head, she saw that there was a girl sitting on the tree next to her. As it turned out, it was Coco, who had stolen all the food from the couriers and was now happily sitting on a branch and eating their kebabs. The delivery girl tried to calm her down, saying that she didn't have to steal food from them because they had enough of it. However, at that moment, someone appeared behind her and hit her on the back with all his might, causing the girl to lose consciousness. As it turned out, it was Charlie and Camilla. They knocked out the couriers and were now ready to take from them all the food that they brought here. They unpacked the food boxes and after a while sat down by the fire to cook chicken legs. The boys were delighted because all the boxes were full of different meats. Evelyn noticed that her older sister was indeed right. There really was plenty of food here, and thanks to Camilla, they even managed to get some chicken wings. However, at that moment, the girl noticed something strange. She saw the icon of the people they knocked out and realized that they were from the third group of resource distribution personnel. Thus, they attacked the employees. When Camilla and Charlie heard this, they looked at Evelyn in surprise, still chewing on their chicken legs. They soon realized what they had done, and Camilla began to quickly grab the boxes of food, saying that they needed to quickly take them and get out of here before anyone found out about their actions. She assumed that they could be surrounded when the rest of the participants arrived here. Suddenly, Lena turned around and noticed that someone was already standing behind them. She realized that they had not managed to escape in time. At this point, Charlie stood up and told the girls not to worry. He assured them that he had a plan, and they might be able to get a lot more supplies than they thought. Meanwhile, a whole squad of fighters was approaching them, who also wanted to get resources. One of the participants asked the commander if he was really sure that they were going in the right direction. He suggested that it was useless to go there, because before the start of the competition, they were warned that after the first day, there would be no food distribution. However, the commander assured him that due to an accident, 90% of the participants jumped off halfway and were unable to get provisions, so he did not think that they would allow everyone to die of hunger. According to his hypothesis, the food points were supposed to disappear only after all participants had taken what they were entitled to. Soon, the boys came to the right place and saw boxes of supplies in front of them. A smile appeared on their faces when they realized that they really had not come here in vain. In front of them, they saw a man dressed as a courier. They didn't even suspect that it was actually one of the participants. Charlie greeted the guys and said that he was glad to see that they were able to get here. The participants thanked the courier for his hard work, and the leader asked for supplies for 4 people. Charlie then asked them what rank of supplies they would like to receive. When the boys heard this, surprise appeared on their faces, as they had never heard of a supply rank before. Charlie then pointed to a table where there were different boxes of food that corresponded to each rank. He said that after all, their competition was at a high level, and they couldn't leave the participants to their fate. The most appetizing of all the sets was the D-rank set, and so all the boys began to ask the courier to give them this set. When Charlie heard their wishes, he asked them to prepare 4 energy balls as payment for the 4 third-rank sets. However, the leader was extremely surprised when he realized that they had to pay for the supplies. Charlie made a surprised face and said that nothing in this world is free, and therefore supplies for the competition will also have to be paid for. Then the guy said that before the start, they were told that they needed to maintain humanity, and the participants themselves were the main characters in this competition, so everything had to be done for their convenience. Then Charlie said with a smile that Set A, which includes a protein bar and mineral water, is provided free of charge, and if they don't want to pay, then this is the only option that suits them. The boy then objected, saying that the 4 balls were all they had collected in the last few days, and so he didn't want to give them away so easily for food. Meanwhile, the girls were hiding behind the boxes and watching everything that was happening. Coco asked her older sister if she thought Charlie would be able to exchange food for energy balls. The girl replied that they could only trust him. At this point, Charlie was trying to keep a straight face, but inside he was already celebrating, because he felt like he had these guys on the hook. At that moment, he turned away abruptly and said that he had not even thought that people would volunteer for this recruitment so quickly. The participant asked him again what he had just said, but Charlie pretended that he had not said anything. However, the guy insisted. He said that if Charlie told him everything that was going on here, they would pay him for the information. The protagonist laughed in response and said that in the end, he was not a tyrant and was ready to make concessions to them. He said he had heard something, but asked the boys to promise not to tell anyone about it. He asked them if they knew why resources were divided into ranks. At this moment, the boys' faces reflected bewilderment, since they did not know the answer to this question. Charlie explained that it was because of a hidden bonus item. Those who spent energy balls to purchase them would receive a double reward after the game was over. At this point, the girls who were watching everything that was happening were pleasantly surprised at how smart this guy was. The participants, upon hearing this, were delighted and asked Charlie if he was really telling the truth. Then Charlie smiled evilly and said that it was indeed so. Moreover, the leader of this team had a cute face, and so he promised not to tell the others about it. The guy's face reflected bewilderment, and he asked which others he was talking about. Then Charlie silently pointed his finger somewhere to the side, and other participants suddenly ran out of the bushes, who were also looking for resources. At that moment, the guy decided to take advantage of the opportunity and gave away the energy balls for 4 D-rank sets before the other participants could do it for him. The girls who were watching what was happening realized that this guy was clearly not lacking in brains, and his plan to deceive was incredibly cool. Meanwhile, there was a real commotion among the spectators. The organizers asked the directors how the participant named Charlie managed to tie up the employees. Moreover, he was a demon, and also came surrounded by a crowd and girls with dogs. They said that this was definitely against the rules, and he was obliged to return the balls to the participants from whom he took them. However, Director Lee said that such an action was not illegal. He said that it was just an exchange of resources. Deputy Director Liu also said that the organizers should be glad that someone came up with such an inventive way. However, representatives of other schools whose students had been deceived were perplexed and asked what their students should do in this case. Deputy Director Yan intervened in the conversation and asked what all this fuss was about. He said that if some rule had been broken, it would have been reported by now, and since nothing had happened so far, it meant everything was fine, since the organizers had not said anything about it. At this point, the organizers, who were watching their students being brazenly deceived, began to silently curse the damn demon who was deceiving everyone he saw, and no one could stop him. Meanwhile, Charlie's trading was in full swing, with a whole crowd of participants gathered around him, who happily gave him their energy balls in exchange for the promised prizes. However, When the guys were about to leave, they suddenly heard the voice of one of the tied-up employees, who informed them that this guy was not a member of the staff. It turned out that one of the couriers managed to get out and untie his mouth, and said that these guys just wanted to get resources for free, and the couriers themselves were tied up and had their clothes stolen in order to pretend to be employees of the company for their own benefit. Feeling that the tension directed towards him had increased many times over, each participant who had been deceived felt incredible anger towards him. At some point, the participants looked at each other in surprise and did not understand what to do in this situation. When they turned towards the bench where Charlie was standing, they realized that he had already run away with his partners. The protagonist looked at the remainder of his energy, which was 31,237, and realized that they had not done all this in vain. Lena asked him how many balls he managed to collect, but the main character said that it didn't matter. The girl said that any number would be fine, at which point Charlie began to wonder why she was so interested in the balls he had collected with his own labor. While the girls were running across the clearing, a huge ice spear suddenly appeared out of nowhere in front of them and flew towards them. At the last moment, Camilla managed to block it with a kick of her own, and she wondered who had suddenly decided to attack them. Soon 3 women appeared from the forest. One of them caught her spear and praised Camilla for her excellent reaction. She licked her lips and said that it would be sad to say goodbye to life with such outstanding characteristics. When the 2 groups of participants met in the same clearing, the protagonist felt that the hostility emanating from these girls was increasing. He silently greeted the uninvited guests and felt that something interesting was coming. Camilla warned him that snake people are excellent warriors, especially good at hand-to-hand combat. Rhinos have a huge reserve of strength. They are natural warriors. However, Charlie assumed that the hooded girl was the most dangerous of the 3. The snake girl turned to her sisters and asked them how they would divide these guys. She said that she was ready to give the girl in the hood that tall guy, since he seemed the strongest, to which the girl said that the larger the size, the less speed, and the faster the death, and she could not tolerate such opponents. She told the snake that she and the rhino girl would deal with this guy, and the snake would have to deal with this guy. At first, the snake was surprised by this decision, but decided not to argue and headed towards Charlie. Camilla stepped forward and whispered to her sisters not to fight, as they had to take part in this. Meanwhile, the snake turned to Charlie and said that of all those present, she liked him the most. She licked her spear and asked him provocatively if he wanted to have some fun with her. At this point, Charlie made a surprised and pleased expression, saying that he was from a decent family, and therefore would be misunderstood. Hearing this, the snake laughed, saying that apparently the boys had a good time here, but now it was they who would play with them. She said they would play until she won, and then she rushed with a spear straight at Charlie. When Camilla saw this, horror appeared on her face and she turned to Charlie and ordered him to be careful. However, the main character managed to intercept the spear with his hand and told the snake that he is not as cruel as she is, because he gives people a chance to prove themselves. He asked if she would like to set a small goal first and play until the first tears. And then he grabbed her spear with his other hand, approached her and asked what she thought about it. He leaned down and stood a few centimeters from her face with a mischievous smile, calling her auntie. When the snake heard such an address to itself, incredible resentment appeared on its face, and tears even appeared in its eyes. She hit him with her tail as hard as she could, causing Charlie to jump to the other side as the girl was now furious. Meanwhile, Camilla watched everything that was happening, and didn't even notice that a monster was flying towards her from behind. The huge rhinoceros woman stood behind her and closed her arms to attack while Camilla was confused. When the girl turned around, she saw that 2 huge fists, imbued with magical energy, were already flying at her. Meanwhile, Charlie continued to jump from side to side, trying to avoid the snake's attack. He said with displeasure that she was too ruthless towards him. He looked around, trying to figure out where the snake was, and realized that he didn't even know what to do with it. At that moment, the girl rushed at him from the forest, saying that instead of trying to save himself, he should think about his last words before he died. When the spear was literally an inch from his face, Charlie thought that he should try to improve his body with the help of the system. At the last moment, he managed to dodge the girl's blow, thinking that his dynamic vision was perfect. Then he also felt that his strength was at the perfect level, and he prepared his fist to attack. He was ready to hit the girl, but the snake deftly jumped away from him and landed on its feet. At that moment, Charlie noticed that blood was dripping from his body onto the grass. He looked at his hand and noticed a deep scratch on it. Blood was dripping from it. He was unhappy that he had somehow missed. When he looked closely, he realized that his arms seemed to be wrapped around a snake. He began to understand that the naturally flexible bodies of the descendants of the tribe had deprived him of most of his strength. It was all about the slippery scales of this girl. Because of this, the direction of his blow changed, and he was injured by her spear. Meanwhile, the snake came up to him and said with a smile that it was a pretty good blow. Then she smirked and said that, to his great regret, snakes were born to kill monsters like Charlie. After that, she again prepared for another attack and said that this time she needed his legs. At that moment, the main character thought that his experience was really less than that of this girl. Meanwhile, the snake jumped up from its place and rushed at Charlie with its mouth open, from which a forked snake tongue stuck out. When she saw him turn around and run towards the tree behind him, she laughed and said that he wouldn't be able to escape anyway. Then Charlie hid behind a tree and hugged it with both hands, smiling, asking the snake what made it think he wanted to run away. He used all his strength to uproot the tree and claimed that he was just warming up. He then threw the tree towards the snake, which barely managed to dodge his attack, pressing itself to the ground. She asked Charlie with a smile if he had forgotten that she was a snake. After that, she rushed towards him again and said that now he would pay for his ignorance. She hit him with the spear between the legs with all her might and said that now he must remember this lesson and not call anyone auntie. However, things didn't go as the snake expected. Instead, its spear broke as soon as it made contact with Charlie's body. The protagonist then quickly ran up to the girl and grabbed her by the neck, saying that he finally caught her. He said that he threw the tree only to distract her and attack from below. But he didn't expect the girl to be so ruthless. The snake was horrified. She asked Charlie how he had calculated everything. She could not understand how he had blocked her attack, because it was the most vulnerable spot of any man. Then the main character laughed and said that he was much stronger than any other man, even when it came to the most vulnerable spot. After that, he moved closer to her face and said that she needed to think about what they should do next. Meanwhile, the dog sisters continued their battle, and while Camilla was busy with the rhino girl, her sisters decided to attack the mysterious hooded girl. However, at school, they realized that they could handle her because she was incredibly fast, and her attack speed was very high. The girl yawned and turned to her opponents, saying that they were too weak for those who could arouse her interest. Then she suddenly noticed a piece of her partner's fur, the snake, appearing right behind her on the grass. She ran to her partner, the snake, who was practically unconscious and lying on the grass. Blood was dripping from her mouth, and she said that she could no longer continue this battle. The girl in the hood was horrified and asked her what that guy did to her. At that moment, Charlie appeared in the clearing and said that he was simply trying out his new technique on her, and he thought to himself that with its aggression, this snake only made him stronger. He looked at the girl in the hood and said that a completely new world had suddenly opened up for him. The girl said that Charlie managed to defeat her partner, and, apparently, her opinion of him was wrong. She stated that he was worthy of being her opponent. She rose up on one knee and prepared to draw her weapon, which was behind her back, and then called Charlie to come closer to her. Charlie addressed the girl, calling her by her name, Clara, and said with a smile that he believed in her. However, at that moment the girl in front of him disappeared, and in her place a large hurricane appeared in the clearing. Suddenly, a girl appeared right in front of him and presented him with a knife to his throat, saying that her name was Carla. In response to this, Charlie just laughed and said that she looked good in a killer costume. When the girl heard this, a nervous smile appeared on her face. She told the guy that he actually managed to make her angry. Charlie, however, just laughed, saying that she had never been calm before, so it was no surprise to him. Meanwhile, the dog girls watched their fight from behind the bushes. They asked Charlie to be careful with Carla, saying that she was not so simple. They said that she was raised as a killing machine from childhood, so her speed is unmatched. Before Charlie could even process what was happening, Carla had stabbed him in the leg with her knives. After that, she rushed towards him without hesitation, intending to put an end to this battle. Charlie realized that this girl was really fast and he didn't have time to react to her attacks. When he turned back, he realized that that strange hurricane had appeared behind him again. Literally the next moment, Carla appeared behind him and again put a knife to his throat. She said with a smile that, if this is all he can do, then this battle will soon end. At that moment, the main character thought that the capabilities of this girl greatly exceed the skills of that snake. Soon after, Carla jumped back a little, preparing to launch another attack. Charlie knew that her speed was far superior to his own, and so before he could do anything, she struck him in the shoulder again. Carla struck him one blow after another in different parts of the body, and Charlie realized that it was difficult for him to resist, because he did not even have time to react to her attacks. The female dogs, as well as Chelsea, watched the whole thing with great excitement, as they understood that Charlie would most likely lose this battle. The competition organizers, however, were only too happy about this, and hoped that Carla would finally be able to put him in his place. Julia was extremely upset that her brother dared to lose to someone other than her. At this point, Natalie reassured her that things weren't that bad, and asked Julia to look at Charlie's face. The girl made a displeased expression, but still decided to look at the screen, and focused on her brother's face. There was a smirk on his face, and then Natalie said that Charlie had spent all these years hatching some kind of plan, and so she was sure that he would be able to get out of this situation. Meanwhile, Carla continued to attack one after another, literally preventing Charlie from moving as his entire body was covered in deep scratches. The protagonist thought to himself that although he was inferior to her in speed and experience, she clearly had more strength than him, in which case he could only die from exhaustion trying to fight back. But he knew that he had only one chance to correct this situation. Then, despite the severe pain, he turned to Carla and called her a talentless old woman. He said that she had not even really touched him, and therefore did not dare to call herself a warrior. When the audience heard this, shock appeared on their faces, They did not understand how, being in such a situation, this guy had the audacity to insult his opponent. Meanwhile, Charlie looked around, trying to find his opponent with his eyes. He offered her to fight fairly, and added that her attacks were equal in strength to a pleasant massage. At that moment, he felt some strange energy literally encircling his entire body, preventing him from moving and also causing him great pain. Carla decided to use even faster attacks, which left several dozen cuts on Charlie's body in a second. But the main character still tried to hold on and pretended that he was not in pain at all. At this point, Julia asked her mother what they should do. She thought it was time for them to order a coffin for Charlie. Natalie didn't even know what to answer, since she herself didn't know what this guy was really up to. Meanwhile, Charlie was looking at his system, which was telling him that his energy was increasing due to growing hostility. However, he wondered why this girl didn't respond to his provocations, because if things continued like this, he would truly be exhausted to death. He also understood that the main problem with a killer like Carla was the lack of restraint. So he had to keep going, and soon she would lose control. Only in this way could he turn defeat into victory. At that moment, he felt the girl appear behind him and he realized that this was his chance. He felt her slow down a little. At that moment, he turned to his system and used the body improvement skill. For this, he decided to use all his last savings. Before Carla could react, the protagonist rushed at her and prepared his fist to strike. The girl noted that he moved much faster than before. She realized she had underestimated her opponent when a fist landed right in her face, sending her flying off to the side from the force of the blow. The girl understood to herself that Charlie was deliberately provoking her, and therefore she just needed to hold on. She couldn't show her weakness to the enemy. As she fell to the ground, she began to scold herself for being too focused on her desire to kill Charlie, and for letting her guard down. However, the protagonist was not going to give her time to rest and immediately rushed towards her using the elbow destroyer technique. However, at the last moment, someone appeared near Carla and with all his might threw Charlie flying towards her, causing him to fly off somewhere towards a tree. As it turned out, it was her rhino partner. She angrily asked Charlie how he dared to hurt her sister. She said that now they will see how many lives he has left in reserve. The girl prepared to attack him with her rhinoceros power, despite Carla trying to stop her. She put all her strength into her fist and aimed it at Charlie's face, but the blow didn't seem to do any damage to him. The girl was extremely surprised when she realized that this guy was still standing on his feet. This made her even more angry, and she declared that she was a warrior, and warriors never give up. The girl continued to hit him one blow after another, but Charlie seemed to not react at all to her attacks. He looked at the unicorn girl with a smile and said that she should have listened to her little sister's advice. The girl began to get seriously angry at Charlie and ordered him to stop underestimating her, at which point the protagonist realized that she had just fallen into his steel trap. When the right moment came, he grabbed her fist in his hand, causing a look of great surprise to appear on the girl's face. The next moment, all the armor on her body cracked, leaving her literally naked. The girl was extremely offended by this outcome of events, and tears appeared in her eyes. She began to frantically cover herself with her hands, and called Charlie an idiot. As the hostility towards him grew, the protagonist noted with great surprise that he had never met a girl with such curves. Carla decided that her sister had had enough, and so she quickly covered her, and the two of them walked off somewhere to the side. She also took her snake sister with her and told Charlie that she remembered him, and when the protagonist looked after them, he noted that he regretted that he had to let these three go. At that moment, his partners and dogs came up to him and unanimously noted that Charlie was incredibly cool. The main character noted to himself that although his body still felt pain, everything healed on it quite quickly, so the wounds were practically not scary to him. After that, he turned to the girls and said that they needed to improve their ranking, thinking to himself that physical fitness was, of course, good, but he had to find a way to attract more people and get more energy. After that, he and the girl went deep into the island to earn even more energy. Meanwhile, something strange was happening in the center of the zone. People were fighting monsters that were crawling out from underground. These were big-mouthed worms, second-level monsters. They looked very scary, and therefore it took the efforts of several people to defeat even one of them. Meanwhile, the girls and Charlie watched everything that was happening from the shelter. Camilla asked the main character if they were going to go there. Charlie replied that there was no need for them to rush there. He assured them that there were a lot of people there now, and he was sure that the boss would not sit idle. When he looked closely, he saw in the distance a creature that looked like a huge spider, from whose body grew the body of a human girl who had long pink hair, her bangs covering her face. When Camilla took a closer look at the monster, she realized that it was a level 5 monster, namely, the evil beetle queen. When she realized that Charlie wanted to head towards her, she warned him that they would not be able to defeat her. But the protagonist asked her why she assumed that they would act on their own. After this, he suddenly rose to his feet and prepared to carry out his plan. Charlie shouted loudly to the fighters on the battlefield that the queen was approaching and asked them to act quickly. He said that a lot of energy would fall from her, and they would not have another chance like this. When the warriors heard this, they began to think about the stranger's words. They decided that his words made sense, so they rushed towards the beetle queen, intending to take all of her energy for themselves. Several fighters rushed at her at once, using all their strength to attack her, because each of them wanted to take her energy for themselves and did not want to share it with others. However, it was not difficult for the Beetle Queen to throw back all the attackers with the help of her tail and paws. Then the magicians entered the battle. They used their spells, hoping that they could break through the defense of this monster. Charlie, who was watching everything, thought that this monster was indeed quite strong, but he did not expect that she would not react at all to the attacks that were flying towards her. He looked over her body carefully and began to think that perhaps she really didn't have a single weak spot. However, he then looked closer at her back and noticed a glowing purple crystal in the area of her tailbone. He then informed his companions and the warriors approaching them that he had a plan. He whispered something in Camilla's ear so that the others wouldn't hear his words. When the girl heard his plan, she said that he was putting himself in danger, but Charlie said that it was worth it. He snatched a spear from one of the fighters, who was swinging it ineptly from side to side, and headed towards the Beetle Queen. While she was busy with the warriors who were attacking her from the front, the protagonist jumped into the air and decided to attack her in a weak spot. He threw the spear with all his might at the part of the body where the purple crystal was, hoping that it would hit the target accurately. However, the spear hit the Beetle Queen in the arm, causing her to scream in pain, and her hostility towards the protagonist began to grow. After which Charlie turned to Camilla and said that it was her turn to act. The girl immediately jumped into the air and used a skill called Earth Strike, splitting the ground beneath the monster's feet. The Beetle Queen's body cracked in different places, leaving huge holes there. At this moment, the protagonist saw that her weak spot was uncovered, and decided that now was the time to attack. He used all his strength, putting it into his fist, and then rushed at the Beetle Queen, rushing through her and delivering a crushing blow to her weak spot. When he landed on the ground, Camilla ran up to him and admitted that his plan was indeed a good one. However, she suddenly heard strange sounds behind her, and when she turned around, horror appeared on her face. She saw that right behind the protagonist stood the Beetle Queen, who had now turned into an even more terrifying monster, her mouth turning into a huge black hole, ready to swallow everything in its path, especially the man who had hurt her so badly. Camilla was horrified. She didn't understand how this monster could still be alive. At that moment, the Beetle Queen grabbed Charlie's head in her mouth, while the system informed him that his energy had been increased by 1,273. Camilla watched in horror as the monster's huge, toothy mouth swallowed the main character. However, when Charlie was inside her body, she suddenly felt something start to hit her from the inside. As it turned out, the main character concentrated the power in his body and managed to get out of the monster's mouth, tearing it apart from the inside. When he was free, Camilla ran up to him and asked him not to be so careless, and not to forget to control the amount of energy. However, before the protagonist could answer, he felt his strength leaving him and began to rapidly fall to the ground. At the last moment, he managed to land right on Camilla, which left the girl in shock. Meanwhile, Jan, who was watching everything that was happening, demanded that medics immediately come to the arena and help the participants. Julia was horrified when she saw her brother pass out. After some time, the main character woke up in a hospital bed. His entire body was wrapped in bandages. A young nurse approached him and asked him with a smile how he was feeling, and then said that she would call the doctor now. As the girl headed towards the exit, Charlie remembered the system's message that he had successfully absorbed the soul of a level 5 demon, and now he was wondering if it was really true. He turned to the system again and realized that everything was indeed true. But tears of joy appeared in his eyes because he thought that he was good for nothing in this life. But it turned out that he still had the power of demons. However, he was worried about why he hadn't woken up earlier. He assumed that he needed to anger someone again in order to heal. However, Charlie decided he should stop thinking about it and try out the new skill instead. He clenched his hand into a fist and felt a whole new strength fill it. The next moment, his middle finger transformed and now looked like a claw, from which an ominous energy emanated. Charlie realized that he was completely disappointed, since his new skill only covered his middle finger and not his entire body. However, fortunately, he understood that this was not all that he had received. He also had access to the upgrade of demonic armor. When he used it, he felt the bandages on his body begin to tear, and his whole body began to transform. Soon, his entire arm was covered in armor that resembled scales with spikes. Then he swung his fist and decided that he should try his new attacks. Meanwhile, the nurse was leading the doctor into the room. She said that the guy who defeated the Queen of Pests was finally starting to come to his senses. The doctor said that it was good that he came to his senses, but he was sorry that he would not be able to take part in the competition. At that moment they felt strong gusts of wind, and the nurse was forced to hold her robe with her hands so that it did not rise too high. When they returned to the room, the doctor looked at Charlie and said that his body was in good condition. It had only been one day, and most of the internal damage had returned to normal. The doctor said with a smile that he would be able to discharge him in a month. Charlie was shocked and said that he had to participate in a competition tomorrow and could not wait a month. However, the doctor said that he should not take such things so seriously at such a young age. At the moment, all his bones are crushed, and therefore there can be no talk of any competition. At this point, Charlie turned to his system and decided that maybe he still had a way to fix it. While the nurse was bandaging him with new bandages, he used his self-healing skill. He mentally apologized to the girl, because he understood that he needed to gather energy as quickly as possible and heal his injury. Without thinking twice, he reached out his hand and touched the nurse's body, which made her extremely embarrassed. She immediately hit him on the hand and asked what he was doing. The system told Charlie that the energy had been increased by 100, and he smiled and told the nurse that he was just stretching his arm. The dissatisfied girl headed towards the exit of the ward and said that she would call a nurse to help him. At this moment, Charlie became upset, because he understood that he would get much more energy from this girl. Then he began to think that his plan apparently would not work. Meanwhile, nurses walked calmly along the hospital corridors, wheeling patients to their rooms. However, a strong wind suddenly blew, causing their robes to rise, forcing them to cover themselves with their hands. As it turned out, it was the main character who, with the help of his skill, caused hostility from several nurses at once. He then triumphantly turned to the male patients and told them in detail what color the nurse's underwear was. The men listened to his stories with great pleasure and thanked him for such a presentation. However, the protagonist had no intention of leaving things as they were, and so, as he moved, he left all the patients without clothes, thereby causing even greater hostility towards himself. Meanwhile, a few days later, a huge crowd of spectators gathered in the one-on-one sparring arena. Among them were Julia and Natalie. The girl regretfully noted that her brother was able to defeat the queen, but was unable to take part in the competition. However, at that moment, the director announced Charlie's name and said that he could go up into the arena. Julia was extremely surprised and asked her mother if she had misheard. She thought that Charlie was seriously injured and therefore did not understand how he could be here. However, the protagonist actually showed up to the arena, his body still wrapped in bandages. But he had no intention of missing the competition. Julia was horrified. She didn't understand what this idiot was planning. Meanwhile, Charlie walked up to his opponent, humming a song to himself. His opponent was surprised that this guy was acting so strangely. He frantically grabbed his sword, not understanding what Charlie was going to do. Then the main character suddenly extended his hand and bowed, saying that he was glad to meet his opponent. The man decided that he too should not forget the basic rules of etiquette. So he bowed back and said that he too was glad to meet her. At this moment, the protagonist took advantage of the situation and dealt him a crushing blow to the head, while he was busy greeting. His face was trampled into the ground and he could no longer fight. The observer was forced to admit that Charlie was the winner in this fight. Meanwhile, Julia and Natalie tried to pretend they didn't know this guy. Over the next few days of matches, Charlie's shameless adaptability helped him defeat one opponent after another. He knocked each of them out, thereby increasing his energy. Every defeated enemy felt hostility towards him, but this only played into his hands. Soon the main character met another opponent, who turned out to be a girl he had already met. It was Carla. She looked menacingly at Charlie and said that this time she would take revenge on him. She threw off her cloak and took out her weapon, saying that this time she would not let him use his tricks. In response, Charlie began to show how he waved his arms, pretending to be a skilled fighter. Thus, the fight between Charlie and Carla began. The girl looked at the main character in surprise and asked where his weapon was. However, the main character just smiled and said that his weapon was his own body. Then the girl hid the swords behind her back and said that she would not treat him like that. Then she wanted to take off her armor, but suddenly stopped. This scene really caught the host's attention, and he immediately rushed to Carla to see with his own eyes what she was doing. The girl said that she had no clothes under her armor, so she would simply accept defeat. The main character was surprised. He said that she didn't need to do this, because she was simply not dressed. He began to assure her that no one was looking at her, and if she wanted, he could undress with her. When Carla heard this, she immediately aimed her magic beam at him, and the protagonist barely managed to put out his armored hand to defend himself from the blow. When he raised his head, he saw that the girl was delivering crushing blows to him one after another. Her speed was incredibly high. Charlie knew that if he had crossed paths with this girl in the arena a little earlier, he definitely would not have survived this attack. Carla thought to herself that she had assumed that she could easily deal with this big guy if she wore armor, but she had not expected this outcome. However, this gave her strength. She understood that she could not disgrace the honor of her family, so she used all her praying mantis power to deal a crushing blow to the guy. Charlie was horrified when he realized that the girl was launching explosive attacks at him. Before he could do anything, Carla was literally a centimeter away from him. Charlie knew that he couldn't stop her, and if he missed another attack like that, he would be left without an arm. He also understood that this time Carla was ready for some trick on his part, and perhaps this would work now too, so he should take the risk. At that moment, the girl pierced his body with her swords, causing blood to spurt from his back. At this point, Carla smiled and said that she had won. But Charlie said that was not true at all. Despite being pierced by 2 swords, he gathered his strength and aimed his fist towards the girl. With a powerful movement, he pinned the girl to the ground, thinking about how much trouble she had caused him. The girl's armor cracked from the blow. She lay on the ground, exhausted, and Charlie thought that her strength probably exceeded that of a third-level warrior. After that, he pulled her swords out of his body, happy that he had finally defeated her. These wounds did not cause him any harm, as he could heal himself, but suddenly he noticed that Camilla was falling right behind him. The protagonist ran up and managed to prevent her from falling. He noticed that she had 32 fractures all over her body, not understanding who could have caused her such damage, because she was barely inferior to anyone in strength. Before losing consciousness, the girl asked Charlie to be careful with space martial arts. Charlie wondered if this was the martial art that was considered the most difficult to learn in the West. The host announced that Winston was the winner of the competition, but despite this, someone tried to continue the battle, and Charlie was forced to catch Camilla and save her from being hit. They barely had time to jump aside to avoid the blow when a man appeared above them. Charlie cursed angrily, asking if the man knew the rules of conduct, to which the guy, Winston, a third-level warrior, replied that he just wanted to say hello. He smiled and said that it was just a welcoming ceremony and there was nothing dangerous about it. Winston said that next time, they would settle all their issues. Medics showed up at the arena to take Camilla away, and Charlie wondered if Winston had come here for him, and that Camilla had suffered in vain. When the girl was taken to the medical center, the main character said that he really appreciated everything she did for him. The host announced the exciting moment. After intense battles, they would finally learn the names of the participants who made it into the top 6. They also have death matches ahead of them, and they will soon find out who will be this year's champion. When Charlie looked up, he saw that his next opponent would be Winston. Their fight was supposed to take place that same day. Winston arrived at the arena, but could not find Charlie. Julia informed her mother and the girls sitting next to her that Charlie had finally arrived at the arena. When they looked up, they saw that Charlie was indeed there, now in a new suit, with strange jars hanging from him. The audience began to discuss his costume, saying that he looked like a moron. When he arrived at the arena, Winston asked Charlie if he was ready to admit defeat, but Charlie replied that it didn't matter what he had planned. It was none of his business. Winston smiled and pulled out his sword, saying that he was now ready to see what the horned family member was capable of. Charlie, hearing this insult, replied that Winston should first sort out his own appearance. At that moment, Winston began the duel, and in just an instant he found himself behind Charlie. He noticed that the protagonist had demonic armor and realized that it was a great ability that he would like to have. The protagonist tried to fight off the sword strike, but Winston took out chains and wrapped them around his sword, declaring that Charlie had already lost. Charlie realized that these attacks were too strong for him and took one hit that knocked him down. After this, Winston sank to the ground and said that now he would put an end to all this. However, Charlie asked him not to rush, telling him to look up. When Winston looked up, he saw the same jars from Charlie's suit flying at him. He realized that it was powder. Taking advantage of his enemy's confusion, Charlie jumped to his feet and rushed towards him. This behavior angered Winston, and he stated that he had originally planned to simply let Charlie go, but now he was going to kill him. At that moment, black smoke enveloped the main character, and he stopped seeing everything around him. Camilla realized that it was a trap. Charlie used this technique to deprive her of the ability to control the space, and that is how he defeated her. Soon Winston appeared right above Charlie's head, shouting that he was a coward. But now he looked completely different from before. He took his true form, as he was a member of the Demon King clan. Before he could do anything, Charlie punched him right in the face. The protagonist asked dismissively why Winston looked like that. This behavior angered Winston even more, and he confirmed that he was going to kill Charlie. At this moment, a strange black energy began to surround his body, and Charlie thought that this student's ability was unique, but he did not understand where it came from. Natalie said that anything was possible, but in any case, the enemy's abilities were significantly superior to Charlie's. Meanwhile, the main character stood in the middle of the field and tried to figure out where his opponent was. Suddenly, Winston hit him on the back with his sword. He continued to mock Charlie, saying that he was not special at all. Charlie turned around and tried to hit him, asking if he was from the royal clan. Winston confirmed his guess. He said that he was a member of the royal clan and struck Charlie with his sword again, but he blocked it with his armor. Winston was surprised, stating that the demon clan did not have such defensive skills, and asked Charlie who he was. At that moment, Charlie appeared right next to him with a smile on his face and said that he was his daddy. After that, he began to strike one after another, increasing the hostility towards himself, which made the battle easier for him. Winston was confident of his victory. He watched Charlie, thinking that whoever this guy was, he would not be able to resist his skills. Winston then prepared to attack again, confident that he would still be the winner. The entire audience held their breath, and at that moment Julia noticed that the sound suddenly disappeared. When the smoke cleared in the arena, everyone saw Winston kneeling, and Charlie holding his huge sword, with which he cut off half of Winston's horn. Camilla was shocked to realize that Charlie had actually won, while Chelsea covered her face with her hands, not expecting such an outcome. Once in the arena, Charlie anticipated Winston's attack and managed to notice him behind him. When the sword was almost at his disposal, Charlie put out his hand and blocked the blow. Taking advantage of the confusion, he intercepted Winston's sword and stabbed him between the legs. As Winston knelt down, he asked Charlie how he knew he was behind him. Charlie, holding Winston's sword in his hands, rushed at him and replied that it was not for nothing that he brought the seasoning to the arena. With one blow, he cut off one of Winston's horns. Winston was horrified, as the horns were the pride of his clan, but now he was deprived of them. He screamed in anger, and his rage increased Charlie's strength by 2,000. Charlie's next opponent arrived in the arena, the leader of the Sheep Knights, Ophelia, a level 8 warrior. She asked Charlie to back off, saying she could handle it herself. Charlie, ready for battle, drew his sword and prepared for the duel. At that moment, an energy curtain appeared in the arena, pushing Charlie back. Winston, puzzled, asked what it was and who had turned off the light. When the smoke cleared, a huge man with horns appeared, holding a sword and looking menacingly at everyone. Ophelia picked up Charlie, affectionately calling him father. Charlie was surprised to see a giant demon standing in front of him, which was Victor. But his thoughts were interrupted by Ophelia, who threw him towards the stands, reminding him that she had asked him to retreat. Pointing the dagger towards Victor, she noticed that he was a 9th-level demon executioner. Victor picked up his son Winston, who immediately apologized to his father, saying that he wanted to get into this world and kill everyone. He pointed at Charlie and said with glee that he never thought this guy could beat him. Victor looked at Charlie and recognized him as the son of the horned demon. Winston continued to shout that now that he had angered his father, Charlie could consider himself dead. Victor turned to Charlie, saying that he must submit to him, and he would grant him the right to surrender voluntarily. Natalie and Julia watched what was happening carefully. When Natalie saw the situation on the battlefield, her face showed surprise. Winston was irritated, not understanding why his father had invited Charlie and approved of him, when he had never approved of his own son. Ophelia asked Charlie with a smile what he thought about all this, but the protagonist replied that he did not agree with it. The girl turned to Victor, asking if he had heard Charlie's words. After that, she launched an attack on Victor, saying that people considered him ugly, and that it was time for him to return to the demon world and stop hurting others with his appearance. As Ophelia approached Victor, a huge wall of fire appeared in front of him, protecting him from the blow. The girl, displeased, jumped back to a safe distance, vowing to destroy the demon. Victor looked at Charlie and Ophelia, saying that they would regret this. Charlie felt a hostility emanating from Winston similar to that which his aunt had felt. Soon a fireball appeared in the arena, carrying the two demons out of the arena. Julia said that although Charlie was not the most obedient, they should treat him better when they got home. Natalie thought that demons seemed to be able to change. Charlie approached the observer and asked why he had not been declared the winner yet. Ophelia intervened and said that he didn't need to worry. If the 9th-level demons had made it into the arena, the place was no longer safe, and they needed to leave. Charlie was horrified when he heard this. Meanwhile, buses with armed men arrived at the scene. Charlie said he had a suspicion that the organizers didn't want him, being a demon, to win, so they suspended the competition. Camilla came up to him and said that they had always been like this. He asked if they were leaving, and the girls said that there was a car waiting for them. The older sister insisted on thanking him before leaving. Camilla thanked Charlie for everything he had done for them, saying that deep down, he was a good person. Charlie asked them not to speak in such words as if they wanted to sell him something. Camilla rushed towards him, hugged him, pressing her whole body against him. She then headed to the bus and said goodbye to Charlie again, saying that they would see each other again. Charlie looked at the departing bus in surprise, feeling bewildered. He couldn't believe he had just hugged a girl. Soon after, he also got on his bus and went home. He remembered Victor's words about how he would regret it, and thought about what they could mean. He assumed that Victor had prepared a trap for him. Suddenly, the bus began to shake violently, and passengers began to fall sharply from their seats. When Charlie looked out the window and saw that they were being attacked by firewolves, he realized that this was the last trump card that Victor was talking about. At this point, the military personnel who were accompanying the participants turned to the drivers and ordered them to immediately take the children to the nearest shelter. When the driver heard this, a sinister smile appeared on his face. At this point, everyone was informed that preparations were underway for battle. The military sent a distress signal from the communicators, and therefore, they needed to hold out until the army came to their aid. Meanwhile, the bus was struggling to move forward to get into hiding from the firewolves that were following it. Just moments before the gates closed, the bus was unable to pass through them, and the military then asked all passengers to remain calm as they had finally arrived at a safe place. Soon after, the boys got off the bus to catch their breath. The driver turned to the military and asked 4 of them to stand there. He was thinking about whether he should send someone for help, because if the enemy found them, these steel gates would definitely not hold him. However, at that moment, Charlie appeared in front of them and stopped them. He said that they would decide this later, but now he needed to sort out one issue with the driver. The military did not allow him to do this, saying that all personal issues would be resolved after they resolved the current problem. However, the main character was not going to listen to them. He tried to push the soldiers away with his hands, and they could not stop him, noting his incredible strength. Charlie calmly stated that his question was an order of magnitude more important. He approached the driver, and the man asked him what he wanted from him. Instead of answering, the protagonist hit him with his armored hand, leaving a huge hole in his chest, and asked him why he hated him so much. He asked why the man he was meeting for the first time felt such hatred towards him. At that moment, the military pointed their guns at the protagonist and ordered him to immediately release the driver, otherwise they would shoot. At that moment, the driver laughed evilly, and an ominous energy began to swirl around him. Then he took his true form and turned into a huge monster with a bunch of teeth. Then the military realized that it was all a mirage. However, Charlie's blow was so strong that the monster fell to the ground. The military noted that it was a mirage with excellent camouflage skills, and they could not even understand at what point this monster began to pretend to be a driver. Afterwards, they thanked Charlie for his help, but he said it was all nonsense. Then he suddenly rushed through the passengers who had exited the bus, knocking off their heads with his blow. As it turned out, they were also part of the mirage, and when they died, instead of human bodies, slightly smaller monsters appeared on the ground. The soldier asked Charlie how he knew that all these people were not really people. The protagonist said it was obvious, thinking to himself that the system kept opening windows of hatred for him. And of all the people there, only the driver could hate him so much. Then they suddenly realized that this idiot had planned to bring them here all along, and that there was probably an ambush waiting for them here. However, before they could do anything, a monster appeared in this shelter. It was a dragon of the realm of the dead, which had already managed to eat several people. As soon as Charlie appeared in front of him, the dragon focused its gaze on him, and even dropped the man it was about to eat from its mouth. He then fired a stream of fire towards Charlie, which the protagonist barely managed to dodge. At this point, the soldier noticed the approaching attack and asked Charlie to be careful. When the protagonist turned his gaze and looked up, he realized that the dragon was already standing next to him. The system every now and then confirmed to him about the increasing hostility. After that, Charlie suddenly ran to the side, and the dragon ran after him. At some point, the main character suddenly jumped up, causing the monster to freeze in bewilderment. The dragon looked around the area in front of him and realized that he couldn't see the guy anywhere. However, as it turned out, he did not have time to react in time to the fact that Charlie disappeared in front of him, and therefore crashed straight into the wall. When the monster was finally defeated, the rest of the passengers got off the bus and began praising Charlie. The system informed him that his energy was constantly increasing, and so the protagonist decided that this fight was a great opportunity for him. He thought to himself that this devil was helping him become stronger with his own hands. He then headed towards the dragon and decided to finish it off before the monster came to its senses. He struck him one blow after another until he died. The soldiers watched in horror as this happened, realizing that this guy didn't even spare the female. At that moment, they reported over the radio that in the 4th block of the city, a convoy of dogs had been attacked, and they could not send anyone to help. When the main character heard about the city of dogs, he ran up to the soldier and asked if it was really a security radio. The soldier confirmed it, saying that help was needed in the city of dogs. Before he could say anything, Charlie snatched the radio out of his hands, saying he would do it himself. Meanwhile, in the 4th block, there were 2 demon girls. One of them did not understand why her brain did not allow them to kill anyone, even those who imprisoned her underground. Her partner replied that she had heard that the whole thing was that they had one of their people, so they needed hostages too. Before the pink-haired girl could even respond, the protagonist landed on her body. Then he suddenly grabbed her by the back and asked if she was okay. The girl with loving eyes noted that this guy was incredibly handsome. Then her partner came up to her and asked Charlie what squad he was from and how he got there. Charlie explained that he was from the Demon King's convoy and said that His Majesty personally sent him here for a certain mission, after which he handed them a red stone. The green-haired girl recognized the stone as a dragon scale, but asked him why there was blood on it. Meanwhile, her partner couldn't cope with her feelings and kept clinging to Charlie. She said that they were now moving towards another squad, and she would like to take him with her. At that moment, the green-haired girl realized that she was being completely ignored, and this made her very angry. As the 3 of them made their way to the scene, Charlie thought about how he was about to save his dog partners. Meanwhile, the dog sisters were in a cage. Camilla tried to calm Coco down, saying that they would definitely be rescued soon. At that moment, she heard a familiar voice and realized it was Charlie. However, when the guy approached the cage and looked at her, the girl froze in horror, seeing a bunch of lipstick marks on his face. She asked him if he was in league with these devils. At that moment, a girl with pink hair approached him and said that apparently he had finally found his companion. When Camilla heard this, she angrily asked the protagonist what he told her. However, instead of answering, Charlie grabbed her and covered her mouth with his hand. He said that the problem wasn't really him. He wasn't the one who was willing to help them. Hearing this, the devil approached him and addressed the dogs, saying that they had not grown to the level of this guy. After that, they headed out of the room, and Charlie thanked the girl, to which she replied that it was all nonsense and they should rely on each other. At that moment, Camilla felt that there was something inside her mouth. When Charlie and the she-devil were far enough away, she spat out the earpiece Charlie had handed her, wondering if he had snuck in here just for them. As it turned out, it was an earpiece through which one could hear the military's conversations. They were talking about where the enemy was currently located. Soon the military noticed that another channel had connected to them and began to suspect that someone was listening to them. Then Camilla explained to them that Charlie had revealed his true identity and had secretly smuggled an earpiece into their possession. Meanwhile, Charlie came to the place where the level 6 Bone Demon and the level 4 Overseer were. They said that they would not wait for their opponents to go on the offensive, so it was decided to create a special squad to return the demon they needed here. He asked those present who were willing to join him. Charlie thought to himself that he didn't have to do this, but he could let them screw up at the last minute, and then he would definitely earn a lot of energy points. Then he decided to raise his hand and volunteer for this cause. They were also joined by warriors of levels 3 and 4. The Bone Demon thanked everyone for making the right choice, and offered to welcome the new heroes. Soon after, all those who wanted to go went to the right place, and Charlie followed them. The Bone Demon told all the volunteers that they would be generously rewarded upon their return. The main character thought to himself that there were interconnected dots all over the place. After this, the Bone Demon pointed at the monster and said that now they needed to go on their way. The demon informed them that there were a huge number of coordinates located here, each of which was associated with the demon. None of them would transport them directly to him, and in any case, the choice of coordinate was left up to him. He asked everyone involved to try to get it back before the enemy did anything. After that, he grabbed all the participants and moved them to the desired location. The landing for the main character seemed unpleasant. Moreover, he found himself in a rather unfortunate place, where he was immediately met by orcs. When they saw the stranger, they immediately rushed towards him to catch him. The rest of the monsters immediately prepared to attack, as they were already hungry for battle. They decided that they could lose face, and declared that demons would never be slaves. However, at that moment, the men who were guarding their land suddenly pulled out machine guns and pointed them at the demons. They started shooting at the intruders, intending to show them who was boss. At this moment, the main character ran as far away from the scene as possible, thinking that only idiots would agree to this, and therefore he needed to get away from here as quickly as possible. He soon reached a relatively safe room and went inside. He spied on everything that was happening through a crack in the door, and heard the guards say that they needed to find the escaped demon. He thought to himself that if he revealed himself, he would definitely not be able to escape. There was no one here who could help him. At that moment, he heard a strange sound behind him, and when he turned around, he saw something strange. He saw a young demon girl who was chained to the walls and her mouth was gagged. At that moment, Charlie realized that this was the same demon they came here for, so he smiled and said that he would not do anything, and was already leaving here. However, the girl was very excited and continued to make loud sounds every now and then. Charlie walked up to her, leaned over and asked her if she really wanted to say something. However, he then hit her on the forehead and said that he did not intend to listen to anything, as he preferred silence. Suddenly he heard the guards approaching the room to check if their prisoner was alive. Charlie began to frantically look around, realizing that he needed to hide. But there was nowhere to hide here. After a while, 2 guards entered the room to check if everything was okay with the demoness, and when they saw that she was still alive, they breathed a sigh of relief. One of them said that in his opinion the best way was to ask a knight to look after her. But on the other hand, everything was pretty reliable here, so they didn't have to bother. Meanwhile, Charlie hid from them on the ceiling. He was barely holding on to keep from falling, thinking that he shouldn't get involved in this. He definitely won't earn any points, but Aunt Natalie could very well accidentally kill him. After this, the guards headed towards the exit, as they realized that they had nothing more to do here. It was at this very moment that Charlie realized that he could no longer hold on, and fell sharply to the floor. The guards heard this and decided to check that room again. At this moment, the main character realized that things were now bad for him. Suddenly he noticed that his hand was on something soft, and when he turned around, he saw that it was right on the girl's chest. The girl was extremely upset and started making loud noises. Then Charlie started yelling at her, ordering her to shut up. At that moment he realized that he was being too noisy for someone who did not want to be found. Guards burst into the room and asked what was going on. They found a rather unusual picture. Charlie's hand was right on the girl's chest. Taking advantage of their confusion, the protagonist appeared behind their backs and apologized for the intrusion. He then grabbed the guards by the heads and slammed their heads together, causing both to lose consciousness and fall to the ground. After that, he returned his attention to the captive, who was extremely frightened by what was happening. Then he finally decided to free her from the gag, and asked what her last word would be. Suddenly the girl started screaming, and said that she was a demon with boiling blood. Charlie asked if she really had boiling blood. She replied that that was why he had to save her. The protagonist asked if she had any evidence, to which she replied that the 2 guards could testify since they knew who she was. However, Charlie was interested in physical evidence, and the girl replied that she had that too. Only demons with this feature have V-shaped horns. Hearing this, Charlie chuckled and said that despite all this, she was still captured. The girl explained that they were just lucky that time. She suggested that Charlie work together, saying that in the past, demons like him were not even worthy of bringing her slippers. When Charlie heard this, he walked up to her and grabbed her by the neck, saying that she had aroused his curiosity. He assumed she knew that demons gained their powers by eating other demons. At that moment, the girl became afraid for her life and ordered Charlie to let her go immediately. In response to this, the protagonist laughed, and said that she herself mentioned that this was one of the ways to gain new skills. Having begun to seriously fear for her fate, the girl began to scream and ask for help. At that moment, someone appeared at the door and asked Charlie what he was doing. As it turned out, these were his partners with whom he went on this mission. As soon as they saw the girl, they immediately ordered him to let her go. The demons immediately rushed at Charlie, realizing that this was valuable prey and did not want to give it up to him. However, to their great surprise, the protagonist did not resist and instead showed them the demoness. He said he was just adjusting the necklace because it was about to fall off her neck. When the demon heard this, he praised Charlie and took the girl with him. After that, he ordered the rest of the demons to head to the right place, since the sorcerer was about to open the portal. At that moment, the main character thought that this demon obviously just wanted to kill him. When the demon left the room, he was immediately targeted. Before he could do anything, his body was shot through by a huge bullet, which tore off his arms and separated his upper body from his lower body. The protagonist thought to himself that the reaction was not long in coming. When they looked into the corridor, they saw a whole squad of soldiers there, led by a man with a huge weapon in his hands. At that moment, one of the demons put up a huge shield in front of himself, protecting his partners from bullets. Meanwhile, the rest of the demons ran in the other direction, towards the exit. Charlie ran faster than everyone else, and when the demon who was carrying the girl saw this, he ordered him to let him go first. At that moment, something rushed past him, causing the main character to suddenly stop. When he turned around, he saw that elephant guards had appeared in their path and were attacking his partner. The demon could no longer hold the girl, and because of this she quickly flew to the floor. However, at the last moment the main character managed to catch her and noted his professionalism. Then he entered the portal that the sorcerer had prepared for him. However, at some point he stopped and sent only the girl into the portal, while he himself remained outside. His partner crawled up to him and said that his uncle was in charge of this operation, and if Charlie helped him, he would ask for a generous reward. However, instead of answering, the main character stepped on his head, breaking his skull into many small pieces. He said with a smile that he would ask his uncle to choose a nicer coffin for him. At that moment, he noticed that military personnel were approaching him, who were clearly not inclined to leave him alive. Then Charlie decided that the situation was becoming very dangerous, and it was time for him to leave. After some time, he returned to the place from where he had gone for this operation. He was met by demons. They expected the entire squad to return from the operation, but only Charlie came out of the portal. 3 demon leaders immediately approached him, and one of them asked what had happened and where his nephew was. At this point, Charlie burst into tears and said that his nephew had died in battle without making a sound, as befits a hero. The demon asked with excitement in his voice if this was really so. Then Charlie laughed out loud and said it was a joke. He added that this guy had a miserable existence. First, his leg was cut off, and before he died, he begged him for help. However, unfortunately, he was unable to help him. Then the demons turned their attention to the girl for whom this whole operation was started. She finally came to her senses, and the demons asked her how she felt. As soon as the girl opened her eyes, she asked to show her the hero who saved her, promising to reward him generously. At that moment, Charlie appeared in front of her and said with a smile that it was him. At that moment, the girl felt a wave of horror wash over her. She screamed loudly, not believing what was happening. However, the main character did not want to listen to this. He approached her and knocked her out with one blow. The demon asked him what he was doing, but his attention was distracted by bats that appeared above him. They turned to him and said that people had activated teleports and were now heading towards them. He also said that they had freed all of their prisoners from the 3 cells, at which point Charlie realized that it looked like a rescue team had arrived. Then the demon said that they needed to go to another headquarters immediately. He ordered Charlie to grab the girl, and said that he would be responsible for her life with his head. Charlie promised that everything would be done in the best possible way, and thought to himself that now that the battle had reached its peak, he could not waste time. He needed to act according to plan. After that, he took the girl and they headed towards the exit. The main character ran faster than everyone else, and was the first to reach the place where they wanted to hide. The demons entered the room after him, but as soon as they opened the doors, they immediately slammed shut, preventing them from entering. Inside, there was a portal from which a huge samurai emerged, looking menacingly at the main character. Charlie was horrified when he realized that the very same berserker demon was standing in front of him. The demon turned to him and asked if Charlie had just closed the door in the guy's face. At this point, Charlie put the girl on her feet and thought that, apparently, the probability of the transition was not very high, otherwise the orcs would have ended up here too. Then, he turned to the demon and said that their mission was to save this girl. The demon said that when he hands over this girl to him, the reward for her will be worthy. Charlie replied that he was used to being a villain first and foremost, not a gentleman. He stated that if they did not agree on a price, he would keep the girl and enjoy her himself. The demon then stated that he could give him the essence of a high-level demon, which would increase the strength of his demonic armor. Then Charlie asked him again what essence he was talking about. The demon explained that he could give him an essence that would increase self-healing. Charlie thought to himself that he didn't like the demon's arrogant tone and what he was saying, and if he didn't take into account the opponent's high status, what he was offering might be some kind of cheap stuff. So he said that he was confused by his proposals. He did not understand what these entities were. The demon, watching the girl, could not collect his thoughts and clearly explained to him the whole essence of the reward. Then, Charlie declared that he had made a decision. But the girl in his arms began to behave strangely. She pressed herself against him, looked at him with a loving gaze and said that he was quite good. The demon then asked Charlie what he had chosen in the end. The main character stated that he wants everything. And if the demon wants him to return this girl to him, then he must give him all the prizes. After that, he took out his sword and put it to the girl's neck, telling the demon that he was able to weigh what was more important to him. Then the demon said that he agreed to his conditions. He extended his hand and handed over to the protagonist the entities he had spoken of. Then he asked him to give him back the girl. However, the protagonist said that he had one more demand. When the demon heard this, he said that the protagonist was taking on too much. However, Charlie stood his ground and demanded that the demon tell him how to use these things. The demon asked him if he really couldn't absorb entities, at which point the girl turned to him and said that she was teaching him how to do it. She said that any demon raised in purgatory would know how to do it. She said that devouring each other's flesh and essence is the ability of demons. Therefore, as soon as an opportunity arises, you need to use it. And then she said that if you add a little of her bodily fluid, the fusion will happen faster. She was ready to kiss him, but at the last moment, Charlie pushed the girl away from him. He realized that he liked it better when she hugged the wall than him. After that, he took the essence that the demon gave him and swallowed it. The system informed him that his skills had increased, and Charlie realized that this was a really great thing. He then turned to the demon and asked him if he still had such a thing. The man thought to himself that it usually takes demons 3 months to digest a demonic essence, but this guy managed to swallow it so easily. He then said that if Charlie swallowed another entity, he would most likely die. At that moment, the main character realized that this demon hated him, and he did not understand why he suddenly decided to be offended by him. However, he suddenly realized that the hatred was not coming from him, but from the person who was standing behind him. But before he could do anything, energy circles surrounded him. Then he suddenly fell to the floor and his body began to bleed. The girl came up and looked at his condition with horror. Charlie realized that the armor had arrived too late, so it would take him some time to recover. As it turned out, it was the demon he left outside. When the girl saw it, she stood up for Charlie and ordered the demon not to touch his servant. However, the demon did not want to listen to this. He raised his weapon and said that this guy would pay for his rudeness. Nevertheless, the girl continued to sit in one place, covering the guy with her body. Then a demon intervened in their conflict, saying that this girl was a scarce resource, and that they could not dispose of her as they wished. The demon had no choice but to submit to the berserker and stop. However, he grabbed the girl by the hands and said that she would go with him. At the last moment, the demoness broke free from the skeleton's grip and rushed towards Charlie. She said she understood that he didn't like her, but it didn't matter, because demons with boiling blood were always driven by emotions. She lifted his face and leaned over him, at which point Charlie, on the verge of losing consciousness, tried to understand what she was trying to do. The next moment the girl kissed him. After that, his armor dissolved. The skeleton took the girl, who, as a farewell, asked Charlie not to forget her. At that moment, Charlie saw a system window in front of him, which said that he had absorbed a new demon power called Blood Boil. The skeleton handed the girl over to the demon, and then the berserker told him that now he could do whatever he wanted. When the demon turned around, he realized with surprise that Charlie had finally gotten to his feet. He decided that he had done it just in time, since he was just about to return to their unresolved issue. The protagonist activated his armor again and prepared for battle. At that moment, a powerful explosion was heard in the middle of the room. As it turned out, the demon managed to destroy the protagonist's claws, but he used his other hand to deliver a fiery blow. He delivered an uppercut to the demon, which he was unable to dodge. In response, the demon struck him in the gut, and Charlie noted that this blow was incredibly strong. After that, they continued to fight, and it turned out that neither of them was inferior to the other in strength. At this moment, the hero felt that now was the time to retreat. He flew to the side to regroup and prepare for the next attack. Suddenly, several dozen firearms attacks flew at the demon. As it turned out, orcs appeared in the hall, and they attacked the demon as revenge for their comrades. However, the demon had no intention of giving up. He took a stone block and threw it towards his opponents. The orcs did not expect such an attack, and in an instant their bodies were cut into 2 parts. At that moment, Charlie realized that this was his chance to strike a crushing blow. He hit him with his armored fist right in the face while he was not expecting it. However, to Charlie's surprise, he was unable to damage him, as the demon was protected by powerful armor. Then Charlie gathered all his strength into his fist and dealt him another blow. His fist hit the demon's face again, and this time it managed to do at least some damage. The demon was shocked. He thought that this guy was only level 2, and that he wouldn't be able to hurt him with that level. Meanwhile, his hatred towards the main character grew. He guessed that it was the boiling blood of the demon that gave him such power, and this was true. But the system warned Charlie that if he burned all his blood, he would die. In response to this, Charlie laughed and said that the demon had better get used to it, because it would only hurt more. After that, he flew up to his opponent and kicked him straight in the head. Meanwhile, the orcs watched what was happening in surprise, not believing that the demons were actually fighting among themselves. Charlie's blow was so strong that the demon's body broke through the ceiling and flew up. This sight made the hero smile. At that moment, the orcs heard something fall behind them, and when they turned around, they saw the skeleton of a demon scattered into pieces. They realized that this man had killed a 6th-level demon, and now they began to doubt that they would be able to defeat him. Meanwhile, Charlie's armor disappeared, and at that moment, one orc noticed that he looked somehow familiar. The men soon realized that it was the same horned devil from the school league, and so they immediately rushed to his aid. After some time, Julia and Natalie arrived at hospital number 3 to visit the main character, who ended up there after his fight. Julia went inside, and what she saw there surprised her. A nurse was standing inside and seemed to be smothering Charlie with a pillow. She screamed that she was a calf and not a dung beetle, at which point Julia realized that the girl could kill her brother and tried to pull her aside. As it turned out, Charlie was deliberately making the nurse emotional because he thought it would be easier for him to recover if he collected some energy points. At that moment, he heard Natalie's voice, who said that even though he was wounded, he still found time to misbehave. And apparently, everything was not as bad as she thought. When Charlie realized that his aunt was in the room, he immediately stood up in bed and greeted her, wondering to himself why this crazy woman was here. He assumed that she was going to take advantage of her position and kill him. Then Natalie continued and said that she was currently thinking about whether she could kill Charlie since he was able to defeat the bone demon. In response to this, the hero said that it was just an accident. However, Natalie replied that she knew he was unwell, but that things were not that bad. She asked him why he thought she was here now. The woman leaned towards him and remembered his words about how there were good people among demons too. Charlie frantically replied that he was one of the good guys and silently prayed that Julia would come back soon and save him from her mother. At that moment, the dog's sisters entered the room, and as soon as Camilla saw the hero, she immediately called him an idiot. However, upon seeing Natalie, she immediately froze in place and told her that they were friends of Charlie. In response, Natalie smiled at her and asked the girl not to be nervous, since they had met before. Then she asked her if she really came here to visit Charlie. Then she headed towards the exit and said that the girls could have fun while she went and prepared some food. As soon as Natalie left the room, the main character was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. At that moment, the sisters looked at each other, their faces showing confusion. Then Camilla walked up to Charlie and quietly called his name. She said that they knew what it was like to be grateful. Charlie had sacrificed his life for them, and now they would definitely repay him for his kindness, because money could not compensate for it. However, Charlie was more interested in money, but Camilla assured him that they did not have much money. At this point, Coco entered the conversation and said that they had a decision that the 4 of them had made. They pushed Camilla forward towards Charlie and announced that they were giving him an older sister as payment. The girl did not expect such an outcome of events and fell right on top of the main character, practically bumping noses with him. She turned to her sisters and asked with displeasure why she was not aware of their decision. However, Charlie wasn't very happy with the whole situation. The room was quite noisy, and he decided that he needed to see how his skills had changed after defeating the bone demon. A day later, he woke up again in a hospital room and was glad that no one would disturb him today, so he could go about his business. However, at that moment there was a knock on his door, and then 2 men entered and greeted Charlie, calling him a little hero. Charlie answered them indifferently that it was thanks to this ability of his that he was able to defeat the 6th-level bone demon. So he assumed that he was now a tasty morsel for any university, and that was why the men came here. And then he smirked and said that since he had performed so well, he was waiting for an offer from them. He announced his starting price, which was 500,000. At this point, one of the men said that Charlie seemed to have misunderstood them. However, his colleague Oral, instead of joining his words, announced the price of 600,000. Hearing this, the protagonist smiled, as he realized that this gentleman had grasped the essence of the matter, and then asked if anyone would offer a higher price. The men realized what they had to do to get this man, and began offering higher and higher prices until they reached 1 million. Then the dog man stepped forward and said he was willing to offer 350 million, and asked Charlie if he was willing to join them. Now he should know that their university didn't worry about money. After this, the auction could be considered completed, and Charlie congratulated the university representative on the fact that he had made a successful deal for 1,400,000. The man was surprised because he had offered 50,000 less. However, Charlie assured him that the 50,000 would be a commission, since he could not conduct such an auction for free, and the man had no choice but to agree to his terms. He took Charlie's hand and raised it up in triumph, congratulating him on getting into Tianlong University and assuring him that the teachers there were excellent. He said that their institution is special. They have fewer students compared to other educational institutions, but their graduates are real diamonds. However, when Charlie heard the words that there were few students there, the smile immediately disappeared from his face. A university spokesman said that their university has individualized teaching, so that they can ensure the success of each student. However, Charlie firmly told him that there would be no deal. He thought to himself that if he had individual training, then he would only be able to nominate one teacher, and this would clearly harm him. After this, he turned to the other men and asked them if they were ready to continue the auction. He eventually went to another university, receiving over 1,700,000, and representatives of other institutions also received their share for keeping quiet. After being discharged from the hospital, Charlie changed and went into rehabilitation, while news of the demonic rejection spread widely throughout the world. When the main character was playing with his sister in the yard, a car suddenly drove up to them and honked at them. After this, two people in officer uniforms got out of the car and looked at the playing teenagers. One of them turned to them and asked if it was Doma or Mrs. Natalie. Julia wanted to answer that her mother was at home, but Charlie covered her mouth with his hand and told the men that Natalie had gone out somewhere. When the men asked him how long it would take for her to return, the protagonist replied that she would be here in 10 minutes. After this, the men took out an envelope and said that in that case, they would wait here. However, one of the officers said that they could not wait that long and asked Charlie to deliver the letter to the lady personally. After that, the car drove away and Charlie waved his hand after them. Then, as if nothing had happened, he threw the letter onto the grass, as if he had no intention of fulfilling the men's request. Julia was surprised by this action and asked her brother why he took the letter intended for her mother. Charlie replied that the soldiers delivered the letter right after the demon invasion, and Natalie was a famous warrior in the past. Then Julia assumed that they had come here to pick up her mother. She protested, saying that her mother had health problems and was not as strong as she used to be, so she did not see how she could be useful on the battlefield. Charlie replied that these people needed an officer with combat experience, because the number of casualties in war could be reduced with the help of a good general. So he took the letter in his hands and tore it into pieces, asking Julia to pretend that nothing had happened and not to tell anyone about it. He then headed towards the house, saying that he was already dying of a headache and would like to eat. However, the girl was in no hurry to follow him. She silently looked at the torn letter that lay under her feet. In the evening, she came to her room, having first collected all the pieces of the letter and glued them together. After that, the letter could be read. First of all, the sender greeted Natalie and said that a medium-sized portal had been discovered in the northern region, and Natalie knew that state barriers were fragile and could be easily broken through. At the sites of the penetrations, space-time wormholes are formed, inside which various changes occur. Thus, invaders enter their world, and unfortunately, few warriors are able to break through there. However, thanks to them, people manage to contain their enemies. But over time, such wormholes will only become more numerous. The appearance of the portal is a bad sign, because if the portal to their northern borders is not closed, an army of demons will descend. However, the good news was that the channel was still not blocked, so they would like to ask Natalie for help. And at the bottom, there was a signature that said that the letter was sent from the city administration. When Julia read this letter, she opened her closet where her combat uniform hung and thought that she would not let her mother take any risks. She put on her armor and headed out of the house, deciding that she would do everything on her own. However, when she reached the door, she heard someone's ominous voice asking her where she was going. Julia was very scared and reacted instantly by punching the man standing in front of her. When her fist touched someone's chest, she realized it was Charlie. At that moment, Julia realized that this was the end, and she couldn't stop. Her fist hit him in the chest with all its force, but Julia hoped until the very end that this blow would not be fatal. However, when the protagonist didn't even move from his place, Julia noted that his defense was quite good. Then Charlie took her hand and asked with a smile where she was going at such a late hour. The girl tried to laugh it off, saying that she was just going to the toilet, but Charlie said that he would go with her. Julia tried to object to him, to which the hero replied that the news had just reported that a large number of masters were heading to the portal. So he assumed that Julia wanted to take her mother's place, and when he voiced this, the girl did not know what to answer. Charlie asked her if she really thought a newbie like her could stand up to an army of demons. Then Julia put on an innocent expression and said that even though Charlie was a demon, she knew he wouldn't hurt her because they grew up together and she thought she could trust him. However, then Charlie suddenly shouted at Natalie and said that her daughter was going to her certain death. Julia immediately yelled at him, telling him to shut up. However, Natalie still heard them and went downstairs, saying that if the commander-in-chief had not called her personally, she would not have found out about anything. She looked at them with a smile that hid her displeasure and said that she knew how her dear children had simply thrown away her letter. It was decided to confine Julia to a room and chain her so that she could not leave the house. They left her alone to think about her behavior. The protagonist noticed that Natalie was wearing elite armor, which clearly spoke of her high status. The woman turned to her son, asking him to keep an eye on Julia and not let her leave the room. Charlie leaned over slightly and whispered to her if she was going to answer the call, warning her that if she did, she might die. Natalie replied that she needed to close her own gestalt, and at that moment, Charlie realized that she was talking about Kairos. He realized that she was going to take revenge on the one who destroyed her squad, namely, her father, the owner of Kairos's body. Charlie wondered if it was worth following a parent who had delivered his son into the hands of the enemy for his own safety. Then he looked again at Julia, who had already fallen asleep. and decided that his task was to carry out his aunt's order before this girl caused even more trouble. In the morning, Charlie went to Julia's room with breakfast. When he opened the door, he found that there was no one in the room, the bed was empty and the window was open. He noticed that the chains were broken, and there were footprints on the windowsill. Without wasting any time, Charlie got ready and headed for the exit, realizing that this stubborn girl would cause him even more problems. By that time, a crowd of military personnel had gathered near the portal. Charlie walked up to the portal and started calling out to Julia, hoping she would answer. His screams attracted the attention of the other soldiers, and they began to look at him in bewilderment. Charlie tried to justify himself by saying that he was just looking for his sister. One of the soldiers said that the bulls did not have enemies like Charlie, and ordered him to leave the area immediately. Charlie didn't want to leave and again tried to justify himself, claiming that he could explain everything. The soldiers had no intention of listening to him, and seeing that he was not leaving, they ran after him, trying to drive him out by force. As Charlie ran, someone suddenly grabbed him by the clothes and pulled him to the side, causing him to fall. A girl sat on him and Charlie realized it was Camilla. He asked her what she was doing there, but she asked him to keep quiet. Camilla said that she was on an internship, but did not understand what Charlie was doing there, because this was a military garrison, not a school. At that moment, the rest of the dog sisters approached them. Charlie explained that his sister had run away to join the army, and now he had come here to find her. Finally, he was allowed to stand up and catch his breath a little after his long run. Camilla asked Evelina if she had seen Julia, and she replied that she was not outside, but perhaps she had used the time and space gate. Charlie, hearing this, became scared and asked if it was so easy to get into the army. Camilla reported that Mrs. Natalie had already arrived here. Charlie replied that if he did not return Julia home, Natalie would simply kill him. At that moment, Lena came up and said that this issue was easy to solve, he should join them, and they would help with the search. Coco asked her older sister Christina why they were helping Charlie so much, to which Christina replied that they would then try to make money from him. The girls took Charlie to the team leader, Haley, who asked if he was really going to join them. Lena assured her that Charlie had great muscles and that he was very strong in his own right. Haley said that if he wanted to join, he would have to take a test first. She pointed somewhere ahead and said that he should pick up the thing that was lying there. Finding himself in front of a huge tank, Charlie realized that the test would be much more difficult than he thought. However, he had no choice and went forward, using all his strength to lift the tank. The soldiers watching everything were amazed. Haley asked him to lift the box, but he apparently misunderstood her and lifted the tank. Haley watched in horror, not believing that this guy was really that strong. Approaching him, she told him that there was no point in him continuing any longer, since he had already passed the test. Haley tossed him the command armband, telling him he was starting work today. At this time, Julia was in the medical department and caught the attention of the Knight General Raymond, who was Natalie's first love. He grabbed her and said that since she wanted to help, she needed to start working. Julia looked at him with a pleading look and asked him to take her with him. However, Raymond told her not to stink like a fool, because no matter how kind he was to her, her weak skills did not allow him to ignore her shortcomings. He also said he had told security to keep an eye on her, reminding her that Natalie had lost too much to lose her daughter now. While the tanks and military vehicles moved deeper into the portal, Camilla and her team continued to move on board. Upon arrival, Charlie continued to carry bags around the garrison. He approached Camilla and said that there were too many people here and he didn't understand how he could find his sister. At that moment, a huge monster appeared out of nowhere, holding a torn-out tree and a giant sword. It turned out to be a level 5 mutant, significantly larger than human tanks. Soldiers tried to shoot at him with tanks and weapons, but the bullets did not harm him. At that moment, a drone flew into the sky, controlled by Camilla, who headed straight towards the monster. Charlie jumped out of the drone, activating his armor. Before the monster could react, he delivered a powerful blow to its heart. In just one moment, he dealt him so many blows that Camilla, who was watching everything that was happening, could not even count them. After this, the monster shattered into a bunch of small pieces, and the entire battlefield was covered in its blood. As it turned out, the protagonist used a combination of the demon's armor and the bone demon's characteristics to deal such a powerful blow. Camilla was pleased with the outcome of this battle, and they were ready to move on. At that moment, the system told the protagonist that he could enhance his performance, and then he thought that he could reach the level of that mutant. Thoughts came into his head that he could grow 10 meters at once. He imagined himself as a huge giant with huge muscles that towered over ordinary people. He saw warriors before him who praised him and admired his strength. From these pictures in his head, the main character felt a real surge of strength. Even though he wasn't that huge in reality, he felt as strong as this mutant. At some point he realized that although his strength had increased, his body had not become larger, and when he looked up, he saw the embarrassed faces of his sisters, who were pointing somewhere down. When he looked down, he realized that his pants were bulging very badly, and the forces he felt were coming from that very place. However, at that moment he heard a familiar voice and realized that it was Natalie. The woman approached Charlie and asked why he was there, since he was supposed to be looking after Julia. Charlie tried to justify himself. He was scared, but he still said that he accidentally lost Julia. At this point, Natalie began to suspect that he had come here to find her and didn't know that Raymond had already done so. She began to think that this guy had really changed and was just pretending that he didn't care. However, she decided not to show her true thoughts and ordered him to get lost and come back here only when he found her daughter. She then grabbed him by the shirt and pulled him towards her, ordering him to never agree to anything he was not capable of doing again. At this, Charlie smirked and asked what would happen if he didn't agree. Natalie slapped him on the back of the head and said that if that happened, she would kill him. After this, the main character was filled with determination, and he told Natalie that he would definitely find Julia. However, while he was walking along the road, a squad of armed men suddenly approached him, led by a man in a suit. As it turned out, it was Lucas, the commander-in-chief of the area, and he turned to the protagonist and said that they needed to talk. Charlie immediately stood at attention and said that he had lost his sister, but he would definitely find her. Instead of answering, Lucas ordered his men to point their guns at him, which surprised Charlie greatly. Then he immediately took the oath and said that he would serve the country. This answer satisfied Lucas, and he said that the youth of today are very smart. At this point, Natalie, who was watching everything that was happening, thought that it might already be too late. After some time, the protagonist was taken to Lucas's tent, where the man told him that he called him because he had a favor to ask of him. However, Charlie doubted that this was just a request, considering that he was surrounded by people who were ready to shoot him at any moment. However, Lucas said that he would not force him to do anything, or make him make a choice. He said that intelligence reported to them the approximate location of the demons. They need a key to leave the space between their worlds open forever, and if they succeed, they will be able to attack people at any time. Then Charlie began to guess that he had called him so that he would find this key earlier with them. Lucas confirmed his words and said that they would be on the front lines to distract them, and Charlie would have to do the rest. He had every right to refuse, but Lucas really wanted the guy to help them. Then he turned around, headed for the exit, and said that he needed to think about it. Outside, he met Natalie, and the girl said that she had assembled a group that would take him out of here. The guy asked her what their chances of winning were. However, instead of answering, the woman threw him a medallion in the shape of a wolf's head and asked him to give it to Julia when he got out. Charlie looked at Natalie in surprise and asked if she wouldn't go with him. The woman just turned around silently and said that she would stay here. Charlie tried to stop her, saying that she was no longer a soldier and her powers were nowhere near as powerful as they used to be. However, Natalie replied that for her the country comes first and personal matters come second, so she will not back down. When she left, the protagonist thought about what Natalie said about rebirth. He realized that all this time he had simply been missing his chance. At that moment, a car pulled up to him with Camilla behind the wheel, and she told the hero that they needed to go. However, Charlie only threw the locket in her direction and asked her to give it to Julia, saying that he still had some business to attend to. Camilla was surprised. She asked Charlie where he went and ordered him to get in the car immediately. However, the main character calmly replied that he was going to die, and then headed towards the tent. The girls looked after him in surprise, but did not stop him. Soon the protagonist entered the tent where Lucas was sitting and asked him what their plan was. The man was extremely surprised that Charlie eventually agreed, because the chances of winning were incredibly small. In response, Charlie just shrugged carelessly. He said that perhaps he made this decision because of the beautiful sunrise. Lucas was slightly confused because it was sunset outside now, not sunrise. However, he decided not to delay and told Charlie that since he was ready to help them, they would change the plan a little. He handed him a sphere and said that it would allow him to teleport up to 10 kilometers away, but it would take 3 seconds to activate. He also gave him a knife that could store energy for an attack. This tool could help him out at the right moment. After that, he handed him a few more things that he thought were necessary, but Charlie wasn't particularly interested in them, asking what the point was if the chance that all this would work was no more than 50%. Lucas said he would give him a day to confirm their location, and then they would begin the attack. If there is no news from him in a day, they will begin to break through the enemy's weak position. It is necessary to destroy the passage at any cost. Lucas stated that the success of this operation depended entirely on Charlie, and then the protagonist asked him how he could get lost there. The man said he had one way, then he suddenly attacked Charlie with his fists. When night fell, he came to the prisons they had set up in the garrison and demonstratively threw Charlie in there, pretending that it was he who had attacked him. The protagonist was extremely surprised that this was his so-called plan. After that, Charlie turned around and asked the guards to keep an eye on this guy. When Charlie turned around, he realized that he was not alone in the cage. There were also demons behind him who asked him for what offense he had done to end up there. Charlie replied with a smile that he was just doing what he had to do. He was unlucky, and the man caught him, so he had to get by. Then the demons asked him if he had the keys to the cage. Charlie said he didn't have any keys, and the demons were clearly not happy about it. However, then they suddenly saw the guards going away somewhere, and Charlie said that he had a plan. He pushed the bars of the cage apart with his hands and said that he could handle everything without the keys. The demons were incredibly surprised that he was able to break the cage, because this steel was able to withstand a blow from a 4th-generation monster, and he was able to bend the bars with his bare hands. However, they decided not to delay and followed the main character out of the cage. After a while, they left the garrison and went out into the city streets, but they were empty, and Charlie asked them why there was no one there. The monster told him that they had discovered the location of their army and were probably heading there. Then Charlie asked him how he knew this. The monster replied that they were sent to the front lines on a reconnaissance mission, so they know more than others, but they urgently needed to report this to the leadership. In response to this, the protagonist smiled and said that in that case they really needed to go there immediately, and thought to himself that their plan had worked. After some time, they came to a place where a large tent was located. Inside was a feather, a fallen knight who informed Karen, the demon of desire, that he had important information. At that moment, the girl received a message on her phone that she needed to beware of a traitorous demon named Charlie, and asked her partner to let the guests into the tent. When the main character entered, the girl immediately asked him his name. However, the main character introduced himself as David, deciding not to give his real name. Karen asked him what his power was, to which the hero replied that it was in the process of growing. When the girl asked him about the size, he looked closely at her body and tried to guess the size. Karen realized that he had misunderstood her and explained that he was talking about him. Then the main character named the number 18. The girl began to get very irritated by this, and she explained to him once again that she was talking about his age. In response to this, Charlie just smiled and said that he really was 18 years old. However, Karen was not happy with his answer and said that he was definitely hiding something. Charlie tried not to show it and just smiled and said that he was telling it like it was. However, before he could finish speaking, his friend abruptly threw him out of the tent. It turned out it was a feather. He was tired of listening to this guy's nonsense. Just like Karen, when his foot touched Charlie's body, he felt a strange sensation and immediately knew that something was wrong. When the dust settled, the demon saw that the protagonist was on his feet. He said that he had heard something like this before. At that moment, Pero pulled out his energy sword, preparing to fight the traitor. Before he could do anything, however, Charlie flew up to him with his huge hands and said that he wanted to be honest with them. But it was too late. He intended to strike the demon, but the latter managed to put his sword in front of him in time. Meanwhile, Karen watched their confrontation closely. She noted that this guy's speed was not inferior to the fallen knight, who was known for his strength on the battlefield. Meanwhile, the main character continued to fight with a smile on his face, as he was sure that defeating this guy would be easy as pie. At that moment, Pero struck with his sword, but the protagonist easily dodged it. After that, he used his huge fist and realized that now victory would be his. However, before he could strike, his hand was wrapped in someone's demonic tail. As it turned out, it was Karen. She asked Charlie to calm down, stating that he had passed the selection. After that, they faced each other with intense gazes. The girl still continued to hold Charlie's hand so that he could not harm anyone. She introduced herself as Commander Karen and asked him to follow her. As they walked towards the tent, the girl carefully watched the strange guy who was walking behind them. When they entered, she asked the guy not to hold a grudge against her, as he had heard rumors that there was a traitor named Charlie fighting on the enemy side, who had managed to behead a level 6 bone monster. She also heard that this guy had amazing demonic armor and regenerative abilities, so she personally checked everyone who came to them. The protagonist thought to himself that it was not he who killed the Bone Lord, so these accusations were in vain, and then told the girl that he understood that this was a necessary measure. Karen continued by saying that in Russia, there was nothing about this guy turning into a giant, so she thought she could trust Charlie. She saw that he was capable, and she wondered if he wanted to work for her. The protagonist said with a smile that he would be happy to work for her. Karen thought to herself that this guy was too arrogant, and then said that they found a portal that people also knew about, and both sides were trying to capture it. She said that this portal is the central point of their world, and many powerful monsters always gather around it, so she needed Charlie's guys to help her. She asked him to gather as many of his men as possible, because the more he brought, the more valuable he would be in the eyes of his superiors and the safer he would be. Otherwise, they would treat him like cannon fodder. After this, the protagonist accepted the scroll that she gave him and said that he would do everything in the best possible way. Then he left the tent, feeling relieved that the mission had been accomplished, and decided that he would immediately send all this to his aunt. However, when he decided to use his phone to take a photo of the contents of the scroll, he realized that there was no connection. Then he returned to the tent and decided to ask Karen for help. He asked her if there was a place in this garrison where they could get a network, to which the girl said that special jammers were installed there, so that the enemy could not intercept their information, and special equipment was required to connect. She handed him a small device and said that it had communication channels with nearby demon officers, and he would be able to contact them on any matter. The main character was very happy and thanked the girl for her help. He then opened the phone she had handed him and began taking photographs of the contents of the scroll in front of her. When Karen saw this, she also yelled at him and ordered him to stop. When she saw that the protagonist was not stopping, she rushed at him and grabbed his shoulder with her hand. Then she put her hand into his pocket and pulled out a device that she recognized as the enemy's phone. At that moment, Karen immediately realized that this man was an enemy spy. After that, they went to the commander's tent and Karen started interrogating him. She asked if he really used the enemy's phone. There was something about the story that bothered her though, and Charlie's wide smile told her she was missing something. Then the main character said that they themselves could use the experimental devices, and asked her if they hadn't purchased these things. The girl said that she didn't have such things, and in response to this, Charlie extended his hand towards her. Taking advantage of her confusion, he took out something that looked like a round medallion from her clothes. As it turned out, it was an enemy item called the ultra-luxury massage chair, and as soon as he pressed the button, Karen fell onto the chair. At that moment, several massage therapists connected to her at once. The girl said that the situation on the front line is getting worse, and their world is all about killing. After that, she stated that it was not the same thing, and that one could not contact enemies through a massage chair. Then Charlie said that he was undercover, and people were very good at camouflaging their weapons. He showed her a watch that looked quite ordinary until you pressed the button. He said that as soon as he pressed this button, they would explode immediately. He also had an object that looked like a pen, but it could be turned into a gun. He pointed it at the water demon, demonstrating on him the ability of this pen, which could send out a powerful current. He explained that he had used their phone for its intended purpose, and that this proved that he was actually innocent. Otherwise, he would have attacked the demons long ago. However, Karen didn't believe his words and said that he was just taking her for a fool. At that moment, Charlie realized that he shouldn't stay there. He decided that he needed to somehow get out of the situation, so he suddenly leaned towards the girl and kissed her. As it turned out, at that moment he gave her a pill that could force any memories on her within 30 seconds. After this, Charlie smiled widely and told the girl that she could have no doubt about him. Since Karen's memories had been altered, she had no choice but to agree with him. When the protagonist turned to the rest of the soldiers, they began to praise him, as only he had managed to defeat this girl, and they swore to always be on his side. When Karen looked up, she realized there was no one around. She came out of the tent and realized that her entire garrison had been destroyed and the entire army had disappeared. She began to suspect that an enemy had attacked them, and she had missed the moment. Then suddenly she heard strange sounds to the side of her, and when she looked down, she saw a fire demon lying on the ground. The demon said that the boy took absolutely everything with him. The demon reacted quickly, but the boy managed to run away. Then Karen asked him why he didn't come to her right away. The demon explained that he had come, but as soon as he approached the door, someone hit him on the head. The girl did not understand how this could happen, because they quickly set up a reliable defense so that the enemy could not approach them. Meanwhile, the protagonist returned to the military base and handed over to Lucas the materials that he managed to find. The man was surprised and asked if all the warriors from the Karen army were here, to which the protagonist answered in the affirmative. Lucas then asked what happened to Karen herself, to which the protagonist replied that he was Karen. Everyone present was extremely surprised, and then Charlie told them not to be surprised at how he looked. He really was a desire demon. He said he was born to fight. When his warriors saw this, they immediately began to clap their hands. Then Lucas stated that there was no way he could be a desire demon. At that moment, Charlie grabbed him by the clothes and said that even though he looked a little shabby and his features were rough, he could still be a desire demon. He began to accuse the man of racial discrimination, but Lucas insisted that a demon could not look like that. Moreover, the demons of desire do not engage in fights, even if the argument is useless. Moreover, there are no men among these demons. Then Charlie thought that he needed to somehow get out of this situation, and he declared that he was an androgyne. However, when he noticed that Lucas was handing over a gun, he immediately decided to calm him down. He said that in fact he was not Karen, but her husband, a renowned warrior among the demons. He couldn't remember the name of Karen's husband, and then one of the warriors reminded him that his name was Philip. After this, the main character took the helmet and put it on his head. He stated that the highest investigation of demons is the fallen knights. Charlie then looked menacingly at Lucas and asked if he had any more questions. Lucas was still not convinced. He said that Fallen Knight Philip was the commander of a completely different squad. At that moment, the main character took off his helmet and hit Lucas on the head with it with all his might. Then he headed towards the exit and said that since he had no questions left, he would go about his business. He then went into the next tent, where there was a table with several people sitting at it, all of them 7th level warriors. He looked closely at those present, and among them noticed Winston, whom he had already met earlier. He greeted everyone present and said that he was a fallen knight named Philip. When Winston heard this, he said that his skills were of no use to them. Charlie thought to himself that when the time came, this guy would get his. However, he decided not to wait and immediately rushed at him with his fists. Winston had no trouble stopping him with his palm, and he chuckled, saying that was all he could do. However, the protagonist's plan was to create a surprise effect, so he suddenly pulled his hand out and sprayed pepper spray into Winston's face. The guy started screaming, and the main character continued to pour the solution on his face, causing his eyes to burn. After Winston was dealt with, the protagonist was finally able to calm down. Then one of those present said that now that Philip had shown them his strength, they should have left it to him to intercept the enemy troops. He asked if anyone had any objections, but no one present dared to say a word. At first, the protagonist was happy that he was finally noticed, but he soon realized that he was simply made cannon fodder. He and the other warriors were on the mountain under cover and observed the enemy's movements. At this point, they noticed several cars approaching them at once, but Charlie said that they would let them pass. He then called Camilla, and the girl informed him that they had received his message and were already breaking through the defensive line. Charlie was happy to hear this news, and also said that there were a lot of demons following their people, and so Camilla needed to try to stop them. As it turned out, there really was a whole crowd of demons running after the cars. When the protagonist saw this, he immediately rose to his feet and ordered his subjects to move forward. He jumped off the cliff and stood in front of one of the riders, saying that this was now his territory, and if he wanted to pass, he would first need to defeat him. The rider then announced that they had orders and ordered Charlie to get out of the way. However, instead, the main character rushed into the attack and said that now they would see who was cooler. With one blow, he knocked the man out of the saddle and he fell to the ground. Then Charlie said that while he was here, no one would take a step in that direction. When the man looked up, he declared that he too was a demon. Charlie said that even the demon's path was blocked, to which the rider said that in accordance with the order, he had to return. In response to this, the protagonist said that the order was his problem, and guarding the road was his duty, and he was loyal to his cause. At this point, the rider became very angry and said that he would definitely kill Charlie. He activated his power, and his hand turned into a demonic one. He then immediately rushed towards the protagonist and punched him in the stomach, but this blow only broke his arm. Taking advantage of the moment, Charlie began to strike him one blow after another. He continued to beat him until the rider began to beg him to calm down and say that he really was a demon. At that moment, someone called Charlie on the phone, and the main character was extremely unhappy about this. He said that they called him at a very bad time. Then he realized that it was not him who was actually being called, but this rider. And then he threw the phone in his face. The man turned to the caller and said that he was busy at the moment and they needed to hurry. When Charlie heard his words, he punched him in the face and asked what he was talking about. He said that next time he should remember to set silent mode for unknown numbers. Charlie was really pissed off that this guy didn't even bother to turn off his phone during the fight, and still didn't dare call himself a professional. At this point, the rider said that it looked like Charlie had been called. The protagonist then picked up the phone and was informed that several groups of enemy troops had broken through the defense line, so he was ordered to return to defend, and Charlie was being placed under the command of another demon. At that moment, the main character realized that they were talking about the very same demon that he had mercilessly beaten. Then he placed the rider's body on his shoulder and ordered the others to follow him. Sometime later, he and his squad arrived at the right place, and at that moment, the demon he had beaten woke up. The main character smiled at him and said that the operation was successful, and from today on, he is a woman. When the demon heard this, he immediately jumped up from the stretcher and asked Charlie what he had done to him. The protagonist responded by taking the oath and saying that he was glad to greet the commander and listen to his order. When the demon heard this, rage appeared on his face. He realized that this idiot had really come into his control. Charlie smiled back at him and said he was glad to see his commander. That smile sent shivers down the demon's body. He then forced a smile and said that they were all brothers here, so he could just call him Caress, because they were all equal. Then he said that he was the child of the Bloodblade demon and asked Charlie how he ended up here. At this moment, the protagonist thought that the Bloodblade demon was a 7th-tier demon and his nominal father. Thus, it turned out that he and this guy were related. Then he told Caress that he heard that his father was very good at fighting. The demon said that his father was a great demon who owned his own city. He also explained that Charlie had probably never even encountered this. Charlie thought to himself that the man Natalie hated with all her heart was not so outstanding compared to other demons. After this, Caress said that this was their first time working together, and as Charlie's commander, he should give him a welcoming gift. He handed him a small blue stone, and Charlie did not understand why he needed such a trifle. Because to please him, he needed a more serious gift. After some time, they headed to the place where the huge portal was located. When Charlie saw what was happening there, he realized that it was truly a war that was destroying lives. Seeing this, the protagonist asked his boss if they were really going to enter this battle. Then Caress said that they were indeed going to participate in this battle. However, when Charlie looked at how the battle was going, he realized that he didn't want to get involved in it. Then he smiled and said that he didn't really want to fight at the moment, but he could provide his commander with some things. He said that these things were meant only for him, and when he became famous, he would definitely get rich with their help. Caress thanked him for the gift, and promised that when he became a general, he would not forget about it. After that, they headed towards another demon who was supposed to notice their presence. He turned his attention to Charlie, and asked if he was the Desire demon that had come under the command of Commander Caress. The protagonist immediately noted that he was indeed a fallen knight named Philip. Then the demon smiled at him and said that his wife had already looked everywhere for him. When Charlie heard this, horror appeared on his face, as he understood what he was about to face. After that, he walked towards the tent and carefully looked inside. Inside, he saw Karen, who asked him how he dared to deny all this, when because of him, All they could do was watch as the enemy broke through the defense line. She then rushed after the fleeing protagonist and said that she would kill him. Charlie hid behind Caress and asked him to help him and stop this crazy woman. However, this did not stop Karen, and she simply rushed through the commander-in-chief. From such a strong blow, the man fell to the ground, and then Charlie began to beg the girl to calm down. He said that when his brother woke up, it would be the end for her. However, Karen did not listen to him and instead flew into attack. The impact was so strong that Charlie fell to the ground and flew several meters. The girl still couldn't calm down and continued to threaten the main character that she would kill him. However, at this point Charlie got tired of all this fighting, and he suddenly grabbed Karen by the horns, stopping her. After this, they suddenly heard a signal that indicated a call to a meeting. The protagonist asked her if they were really going to the spatial node now. When they arrived, one of the demons said that the entrance was right in front of them. They would attack people where they weren't expected. All demons should move in small groups. At this moment, the main character and Karen exchanged glances. Soon after, Caress approached them and said that they needed to take protective measures first. When his subordinates saw the device in his hands, they were extremely surprised. Since it was an energy barrier device, they believed it to be the work of the enemy. Then the demon said that this was indeed a creation of people, and then one of the soldiers asked how he managed to get this thing. At that moment, the guy looked at Charlie, who was standing behind him. Then Caress suddenly thrust his fist in front of himself and said that he had risked his life to steal this device from the enemies. His soldiers were delighted and asked the man to show them how the thing worked. Then the demon said that today he would open their eyes and then press the button that was on the device. At that moment, the device rose into the air and bright lightning began to emanate from it. All the soldiers were delighted when they saw the energy field that enveloped them. However, at this moment they began to notice something strange, since they had already seen such a light somewhere. At that moment, the device began to spin around its axis, and the warriors began to notice silhouettes appearing from there. When they looked closely, they saw a man who suddenly appeared right in the middle of the dome. It was a huge man with a huge weapon in his hands, and behind him stood several more people, but much shorter. Then the demon realized that this was not a barrier, but portable portals that the enemies were using, and now they would appear here. Then they looked at Caress, and with one voice called him a traitor. The warriors approached him and grabbed him by the clothes, asking where he got this device from. At that moment the demon began to justify himself and said that it was not his device at all. Charlie thought to himself that he didn't know what this thing was either, but he was simply asked to activate it when he found a target. Then he decided to play along and said that Caress apparently really was a traitor, which no one even suspected. But he believed that he had his own reasons for this. He forced out tears and said that apparently the demon did it for money. All this only heated up the atmosphere between the warriors and the demon. Caress tried to bring them to their senses and said that he would never deceive his brothers, but no one believed him. Instead, the warriors began to beat him, not giving him a chance to justify himself. At this moment, the main character watched everything that was happening, standing near the portal. All the warriors were distracted by beating up their leader, and then the main character took advantage of the moment and entered the portal. He decided that he needed to finish the mission first. When Charlie entered the portal, he realized that without a compass, he would never get out of here. At that moment, he suddenly bumped into someone's body, and when he looked up, he realized that a huge demon was standing in front of him. The demon saw the compass in his hands and told Charlie that if he didn't want to die, he needed to give him this thing. The main character pretended to be very scared. He then suddenly pulled out a knife from his belt and began to stab the demon one after another. Before the demon could do anything, his body fell to the ground and his spirit left him. After this, his soul seemed to enter the body of the main character, and Charlie did not understand what had just happened. He headed towards the portal, thinking it was just another useless skill. When he came out of the portal, they immediately opened fire on him. Charlie put his hands out in front of him and tried to block the bullets flying towards him. Meanwhile, the attackers could not understand who he was, a man or a demon. At that moment, the main character thought that it was his own fault that all this happened, because he held the compass backwards. When he turned around, he saw surprised looks and realized that he was being mistaken for the Ghost of Wars. Charlie decided he needed to get out of here and started fiddling with the compass, trying to figure out which side was right. He fell into different dimensions, until finally some kind of snake wrapped itself around his neck. He realized that it was all over, and when he looked to the side, he saw a crowd of angry warriors approaching him. Charlie clutched the compass tightly, realizing that the object was difficult to work with. Suddenly, the compass began to emit strange energy, and the protagonist pulled out a knife, preparing to defend himself. However, looking at the number of opponents, he realized that the best solution was to simply run away. While he was running, he heard someone's voice behind him and turned around in surprise. There was a huge explosion behind him, and he wasn't sure if that was possible in their time. Meanwhile, battles were going on in the human world. The demons fought with the people, and the Dog Sisters defended their world. At some point, Lena thought that they should stop supporting Charlie, because they couldn't be distracted for a second because of him. However, Camilla stood firm in her decision and ordered them to move forward. The sisters joined forces and prepared for a joint attack. Camilla donned her armor and prepared for battle. At that moment, the demon rushed at her with a raised fist. But a stone wall appeared in front of him, and 5 rifles were immediately pointed at him. While they were shooting, the demon felt the asphalt pulling him inward. He realized that he couldn't move, and at that moment all the weapons were aimed at him. Karen realized that this monster was finished and calmly continued with the mission. Meanwhile, Caress was taken to the demon realm and brought to the room with the throne. When he woke up, he began to nervously look around, not understanding what was happening. At that moment, the king of the horned demons, Karos, his father, appeared behind him. Seeing his hated son, he ordered him to be silent, stepped on his head and asked if he had had any dealings with people. The demon replied that he had been tricked by being planted with a human object, and that Charlie was to blame. But Karos said that he didn't care if his son was a traitor. If he had won, there would be no questions. But since he had failed, he was now useless, and he did not intend to let him go. Hearing this, the demon began to beg his father to give him a second chance, promising to kill Charlie and that he had talent. At that moment, Karos cut off his head with his sword and said that he did indeed have talent, but it could only be realized as a compliment to another, after which he absorbed his son's power. Karos thought about Charlie, a horned demon with self-healing blood armor and devil armor, and also a descendant of the king. He realized that he never even thought that a diamond could be found in the trash. He decided that he could talk to him like a father to a son. Meanwhile, the story moves back to the battlefield. The demons continued to fight with people using all kinds of weapons. At this time, Natalie appeared on the battlefield and ordered everyone to retreat, stating that she would go alone. A portal opened behind her and a demon appeared. He suggested that instead of losing so many lives, they should have a one-on-one fight and put everything in its place. Natalie pulled out her weapon and stated that she had already killed many demons, and he would be one of them. The demon laughed and said that she would not do anything to him, but he thought to himself that this woman was not so simple. Natalie said the head of the last demon she killed still hangs in her mother's room as a decoration. However, before she could finish, the demon standing in front of her suddenly disappeared. He then appeared behind her, preparing to strike from behind, but she managed to block the attack in time. At that moment, the demon split into several copies and said that now Natalie had to find his real body. When she looked up, she saw a fair-haired demon rushing towards her with a huge sword in his hands. Before she could react, he was behind her and told her that it was the end for her now. However, Natalie was not going to give up, and at the last moment she hit Winston with her weapon. She wounded him, and he was surprised at how strong this woman was. Natalie wanted to see his face, but she didn't have time as he quickly ran away. She ran after him, screaming for him to stop. However, at that moment she suddenly fell and rolled down the hill, feeling her strength leaving her. Winston was already waiting for her downstairs, telling her that she had been poisoned. Natalie asked him with a grin, since when did demons start using such dirty methods, thinking that it should embarrass him? Winston replied that his poison was not intended for her, but for that guy who always went for broke. He wanted him to come out and fight him. However, when Winston saw Natalie laughing at him, he became very angry. He declared that he would show what happens to those who laugh at him, and raised his sword to attack. However, at that moment Natalie called out Charlie's name, and Winston looked back in surprise. The woman took advantage of his distraction and pierced his body with her spear. Winston was extremely surprised that the woman had not been poisoned. In response to this, Natalie said that she had a good resistance to toxins. If others could withstand 5 minutes, then she could hold out for all 8, and thus she deceived him. She added that she did this on purpose to be able to get closer to him. When Natalie saw him trying to pull the spear out of his body, she told him not to waste his strength. Her weapon also contained poison that was not intended for him. She explained that it was the poison of a 6-legged half-dragon, which is famous for its ability to quickly paralyze a person. Even demons cannot resist it. Then Winston asked her if she knew that the most terrible thing about demons was not their physical strength, but the element of surprise. He said that he had long ago absorbed one such dragon, and thanks to this he had gained resistance to its poisons. He then pulled the gun out of his chest, and the wound on his body seemed to disappear. After which Winston smiled and said that luck seemed to be on his side. After that, he approached Natalie and said that he would kill her with her own weapon. He was about to strike her, and at that moment the woman screamed Charlie's name again. Winston said that she would not be able to fool him with the same trick again, since he was not a complete idiot. However, at that moment, a portal actually opened in front of them, and Charlie came out of it. Right before Winston plunged the gun into Natalie, the demon pointed at the protagonist and realized that this was indeed the guy he wanted to fight. Charlie was ready for the fight and had already activated his armor, saying that he hoped Winston had decent skills. Without thinking twice, the demon immediately rushed at him with a sword in his hands, threatening to kill him. However, it was not difficult for Charlie to push him away with a blow of his hand. At this point, Winston began to wonder when this guy had become so powerful. He realized that he was not ready to put up with this, and had to deal with this scoundrel. And so he rushed into the attack again. He decided to stab Charlie in the back while he was not expecting it. However, the main character was prepared for this and dodged his blows. Winston did not understand why he was so fast. but hoped that sooner or later he would still show his weak spot. Then he appeared in front of Charlie's face and decided that he had to take advantage of this chance. However, the main character was faster and punched him in the face with all his might. From such a strong blow, Winston fell to the ground and began to cough up blood. He didn't understand why this guy had become so strong in such a short time. He knew that if he couldn't break through his defense, it would be over. Moreover, his speed and attack power had increased. Winston realized that this would not work. He considered himself a genius and a superior kind of demon. He thought that he was a real king of hand-to-hand combat and could not lose to some horned demon. He then turned his attention to Natalie, who was still sitting on the ground and watching what was happening. Charlie realized that Winston was going to attack her, so he immediately rushed to his aunt's aid. He managed to cover her with his back, while the armor disappeared from his body. At that moment, Winston realized that this was his weakness. He noted that Charlie had blocked his attack quite well, and it seemed that this woman was really dear to him. He decided to test how long Charlie could hold out and continued to attack him with his sword. Winston was very fast and tried to attack him from different sides, but Charlie blocked every one of his attacks. Natalie watched what was happening with great surprise, not believing that good demons really exist. Then she decided that she also needed to act and took out a blade from her armor. Taking advantage of the moment, she threw it in the direction where Winston was. Charlie also took advantage of his confusion and told him that if he wanted to fight him, he needed to stop hitting on the woman. He then dealt him a crushing blow to the chest, and as Winston fell to the ground, he sucked his power out of him. After that, he turned to Natalie, extended his hand to her and said that he would help her become. But the woman asked him why he came back, because she told him to run away. Then Charlie started looking around and asked where her house was. At that moment, a device resembling a star was activated in front of her, from which a portal appeared. Natalie warned the protagonist not to touch her weapon, but it was too late. When Charlie looked down, he saw that his hand was covered in purple veins. Natalie explained that this weapon was made specifically for fighting demons from a special heavenly crystal, not to mention the poison of the six-legged dragon that she coated it with. Charlie asked her if there was an antidote, to which the woman said that they were fine now. They were both poisoned, and now they were brothers in misfortune. At that moment, a portal opened next to them, and the guys looked in its direction in surprise. Soon a demon came out from there, whose name was Karos. He said that solving problems with brute force was the behavior of a true demon, and Charlie was worthy of calling himself one. Before Natalie could do anything, Charlie grabbed her and pulled her aside. He ordered her to be quiet, and then hid her behind a large rock that was nearby. After that, he turned to the demon and said that in fact he had long wanted to talk to him and ask a few questions. When Karos gave him his consent, the protagonist asked why he was such a bad father, and why he left him in this world. The demon laughed and said that it didn't matter, because just getting it back was too much of a hassle. Charlie replied that he suspected that was the case, and then they both laughed. Suddenly after this, Charlie grabbed his left hand and tore it away from his body, saying that he felt better when he was convinced that Karos was a real scoundrel. In place of his severed arm, he grew a new one, covered with new muscles, and then the protagonist went to his father, asking if he wanted to have the last word. The demon was ready for the fight and said that he was initially optimistic about his talent. He wanted to train him and help him become stronger. However, now he realized that it looked like Charlie wouldn't get that chance. He then dealt him a crushing blow with his sword, saying that he would teach him the main rule of demons. Karos said that if he wanted to become stronger, he shouldn't stick his nose where it doesn't belong, because it's all a waste of time. After that, he rushed towards his son again, but Charlie managed to put her hand in front of her. Then the demon used his leg and threw the guy several meters away from himself. However, when he looked down at his sword, he realized that it was starting to crack into pieces. At that moment, Karos realized that this was indeed the armor of a high-ranking demon. He looked at Charlie in surprise and asked how he managed to absorb so much power while living among ordinary creatures. The main character thought to himself that if everything continued like this, he would definitely die. So he decided to use the enhancement skill, and his body began to grow rapidly in size. Before Karos could do anything, Charlie appeared right in front of him and put his sword to his throat. However, the demon only laughed and said that this was still not enough. He then hit him with his weapon, causing the protagonist to cough up blood. The demon thought to himself that even though he knew how this child had absorbed such power, such small tricks would not be enough to defeat him. At this moment, Charlie was trying to come to his senses. He realized that this was the first time he had found himself in such a difficult situation. He had no advantage in strength, speed, defense, or even self-healing, and he didn't know how many abilities this demon had managed to absorb over the thousands of years of existence. However, he still got to his feet, and with a smile on his face declared that no matter how strong Karos was, he still was not going to retreat. At first, the demon was surprised by his resilience, but then he noticed the claws that appeared on his armor. With a smile on his face, he summoned the exact same claws for himself. At that moment, horror appeared on the protagonist's face. He did not understand why his father had exactly the same skills as him. However, while he was thinking, Karos appeared in front of him and began to attack him in the stomach. After that, he decided to attack him with his claws, but at the last moment the main character still managed to dodge. However, he knew that he could no longer resist such strong attacks. Charlie decided it was time for him to take action and punched his father in the chin. And in response to this, Kairos only laughed and said that this was still not enough. After that, he took out his weapon again and swung it towards his son. However, Charlie managed to intercept his hand in time and instead struck him in the chin again. The demon noted that his power was very good, but it was absolutely useless against him. He then summoned a skill called Six-Armed Demon Power, and 4 more arms grew out from his back, which he immediately began to attack Charlie with, saying that he had no weaknesses at all. He told him that victory was already a foregone conclusion, but Charlie only smiled in response. At that moment, taking advantage of the demon's confusion, Natalie entered the battle and pierced his neck with her weapon. She turned to Kairos and ordered him to take his hands off Charlie immediately. However, the demon was not going to give up and hit the woman with his fist, throwing her away from him. However, at that moment, Charlie came up behind him and decided to try another trick on him. He thrust Natalie's spear through his neck, decapitating the demon. After that, he sank to the ground and breathed a sigh of relief that everything was finally over. Natalie, who was watching everything that was happening, burst into tears of happiness, realizing that she was able to avenge everyone. Then Charlie came up to her and helped her up, saying that they couldn't stay here and they needed to get out of here now that they had sorted everything out. However, he suddenly heard a sound behind him and realized that this was not the end. When the boys turned around and looked at Kairos's body, they realized that he was still alive. As it turned out, he had reattached his head to his body and was able to rise to his feet as if nothing had happened. A look of fatigue appeared on the protagonist's face when he realized that the battle was not over yet. However, things didn't go as he expected. Instead of continuing the fight, Kairos simply ran away from the battlefield. Natalie said that he wants to break the seal and restore his powers. The main character immediately rushed after his father, but it was too late, so he decided to throw his spear at him, since he definitely wouldn't have had time to run there on his own. However, Kairos easily dodged the spear that flew past his shoulder. At that moment, a strange device, resembling a star, rose into the air. While the demon was trying to figure out what was going on, the protagonist took advantage of his confusion and used the demon decapitation technique, then threw a spear straight into his chest. Kairos said that all this was impossible, but Charlie walked up to him and grabbed the handle of the spear. After that, he pulled it out of the demon's body and in an instant was right behind him. Before Kairos could react, he dealt him a crushing blow across his entire back. The demon was confused and felt like he was losing strength, so Charlie decided to continue the attack. He came up behind him and plunged his hand into the wound on his back. In just one instant, his body seemed to turn into jelly and collapse to the ground. When it was all over, Charlie also fell to the ground, as he was completely exhausted. Natalie, who was watching everything that was happening, thought that something had happened to Charlie and immediately ran to help him. Then the main character exhaled and said that apparently Kairos was still alive. Natalie looked up and looked at the device that was still hanging in the air. She took an explosive device out of her pocket and attached it to the strange star. After that, she announced that the space-time node had been detected, and it would be detonated in 5 minutes, so everyone needed to evacuate. When she finished the conversation, she approached the main character, and the two of them evacuated the scene. Meanwhile, the body of the defeated Kairos began to take on some form, and it became much larger. It only took him a few moments to fully resurrect his body, and he claimed that this was not the only trick up his sleeve. He turned to Charlie, who had already left, and said that although his strength was still at the first level, he could practice, and nothing was over between them yet. At that moment, he heard someone's voice asking Kairos if he had seen his boss. It turned out to be a green-skinned demon, who slapped Kairos across the face and said he was talking about David, the future Demon King. Kairos started crying and saying that he had never met any David. He thought to himself that he was a commander of the 7th level demons and had never encountered such an attitude before. Then the green demon said that he had finally found a man who agreed to take him in. The boss even agreed to make him his adjutant. But now he had suddenly disappeared somewhere. At this point, Kairos began to come to his senses and now looked worried. He stated that when he found the teleporter and returned to the demon world, this guy would be the first to die. However, the green demon did not let him finish and instead plunged his hand into his chest. Kairos was extremely surprised that everything happened exactly like this, and he could do nothing about it. Then the demon asked him that he could not speak like that about him or his boss. As it turned out, this demon didn't even know that the purest power belonging to a level 7 demon commander was flowing through his veins, and at this moment, he was becoming one with him, completely changing his body. Meanwhile, the story moves to the city hospital, where the main character was admitted. He lost too much blood, and because of this, he was given only 3 points. Moreover, all the abilities in his system were mixed up. While he was thinking about how much this whole situation had really hurt him, someone appeared in his room. As it turned out, it was Natalie. She approached the main character and asked how he was feeling. As it turned out, she informed the military that Kairos had died, and now Charlie had to expect some kind of reward. Moreover, according to the leadership, the demons would now be after him, so he needed to be careful. As soon as Charlie heard about the reward, He said that he was ready to kill a couple more demons for it if it turned out to be useful in the long run. However, Natalie said that he should not risk his life anymore because classes were starting soon at the academy, and he could not cause trouble, so he would always have to warn of his intentions. Then he suddenly pulled away from Natalie and asked her why she was so caring. He said it didn't sound like the usual Aunt Natalie he knew. Then the woman suddenly hugged him and thanked him for saving her, and then apologized to him. Then the main character said that there was nothing to worry about, since over the years he had become accustomed to everything that happened to him. Natalie told him that since he was still young, she would keep his reward and give it to him when he grew up. A whole month passed since then, and soon the main character recovered. He was riding the train and still couldn't get over Natalie's behavior. He felt that she was behaving very insidiously. She said that she wanted to teach him how to defend himself from hidden attacks from demons, and she used him as a punching dummy. At that moment, the main character noticed that something green appeared behind him. He immediately thought that it was his aunt who was trying to kill him. He used all his agility to dodge the attack that was flying at him. After that, he landed on the seat and looked carefully in the direction from which the attack was coming. Suddenly, Carla appeared on the seat next to him, put a dagger to his throat, and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. When Charlie saw a familiar face, he calmed down a little. He laughed and said it was an incredible coincidence that they were riding on the same bus. However, Carla said that it was not a coincidence. She bought the ticket because she was heading to the academy. Charlie said that it was also a coincidence that they were studying at the same academy. But Carla said that it was not an accident either, since she chose it deliberately, knowing that Charlie was studying there. At this point, the main character began to be perplexed, because this girl definitely had the intention of killing him, but the system did not recognize evil intent in her. Then suddenly the girl's face turned red, and she confessed to Charlie that she loved him. That's why she's going to defeat him and then kill him. But the protagonist didn't understand how these two things could be connected. Carla explained to him that he was very strong, and not just in physical strength. She said that his speed, strength, and physicality are in perfect balance. And if you add to his skills her family's fighting instinct, the offspring will be incredible, and will help her family rise to the top. She told Charlie that she had been watching him very closely all this time. However, the protagonist asked her to stop, saying that such things cannot be done impulsively. He asked if her parents knew what she was doing. The girl then began to stretch her jacket, saying that they had approved it at the family meeting. Charlie tried his best to cover his face, not wanting to see what Carla was showing him, and then he suddenly asked her to give him her phone. The girl obediently handed him her phone, and then the main character decided to check her search history in the browser. As it turns out, there were a lot of requests on the topic of whether a praying mantis could give birth to a child from the devil. Then Charlie decided to find information about the green mantis and learned that traditionally females kill males after giving birth. So when Carla leaned over to him and asked if he was free tonight, the look of genuine horror appeared on his face. He gave her the phone and said that his mother had once told him something important. He then quickly smashed the wall of the train and ran away from it, saying that his mother told him that he was too young for such things. Carla stood frozen in place, watching in surprise as the potential father of her children ran away from her. She then noted his mesmerizing strength and that his speed had become even greater. For her, Charlie was a real dream man. After that, she ran after him, saying that he would definitely be hers. Meanwhile, the main character teleported back to the train and hid from the girl, thinking that she was a real thorn. After that, the train continued on its way, and Charlie thought that it would not be so easy to get to the academy. After a while, Carla arrived at the gates of the academy. Charlie was already there too, watching her from around the corner, thinking that he should block the gates of the academy. He was scared by the fact that this girl did not want to get rid of him, and he doubted that he would be able to outsmart her. At that moment, Camilla came up behind him, put her hand on his shoulder, and called him stupid. Charlie looked at her in surprise and asked where she came from. Camilla said that she heard that he got in here, and she and her sisters couldn't decide which academy to choose, so they just followed him. Hearing this, Charlie smiled and said that he was very glad to see her here. He then pointed to Carla, who was standing with her back to them, and asked Camilla to pay attention to her. The girl assumed that Charlie wanted her to take her phone number and give it to him. Then the main character decided to tell everything as it was, and said that this girl needed his DNA. She had been following him all the way and was now standing and waiting for him here. However, before he could voice his problem, he discovered that Camilla was no longer by his side. As it turned out, the girl was already approaching Carla, intending to deal with her for her behavior. However, Carla spotted the stranger approaching and asked her what she wanted from her. Instead of a normal answer, Camilla rushed at her with a sword, calling her a pervert. However, Carla easily dodged her attack with a somersault. She then threw her blades at her, but Camilla managed to put a stone wall in front of her in time. However, the impact of the blades on the wall was so strong that it simply exploded. At that moment, the girl noticed that Carla was approaching her in the fog. However, she managed to put her sword in front of her for defense. Carla asked her if it was Charlie who told her about her, but Camilla was not going to give away all her secrets. Meanwhile, the rest of the students watched their fight, while the main characters put on a cap and tried to escape from the scene. Taking advantage of the moment, he went to the new student registration desk and managed to get a student stamp. He then headed to the dorm, thinking about what kind of roommates would be waiting for him in the room, because it would be his first time living with guys, so he was a little nervous. When he opened the door, he immediately greeted his neighbor, but instead of an answer, a wall flew at him. As it turned out, there was already a man in the room, a rhinoceros. The main character managed to react in time and, using his huge hands, intercepted the wall flying at him. Then, with one deft movement, he turned the wall into a cobblestone and asked the rhinoceros what he was doing there. Without giving him a chance to respond, he threw a boulder straight at him as revenge. The blow was so strong that the rhinoceros broke through the wall of the room with his body and flew out into the street. At that moment, Charlie was glad that he was lucky enough to get his own room. However, suddenly he heard strange sounds in the corridor, as if someone was approaching him. He looked out and told the stranger that this was a single room and that no additional occupants were provided. However, when he saw who it was, horror appeared on his face. Because Carla was standing in front of him, she had a suitcase with things. Charlie immediately slammed the door in her face, wondering what he should do. However, Carla broke down the door with her hand and grabbed the protagonist by the clothes. She looked at him through the hole in the door and asked if he was going to open the door and let her in. Then Charlie realized that he had no choice but to jump across the road to the wall and run away from the dorm. When he turned around, he saw that the girl was already running after him, and then he decided that he had no other choice. So he ran to the deputy director's office to meet him in person. He opened the door with all his might and knocked down all the documents that were lying on the man's desk, saying that he had an urgent report. The deputy asked Charlie angrily if he didn't know that he couldn't just barge into the office like that. However, when he looked closer, he realized that it was indeed Charlie, and he apologized to him, saying that he had not recognized him at first. After that, the protagonist sat down on the sofa and said that he had an urgent matter. The deputy assumed that it was about the scholarship and said that they would transfer it to his account immediately after the freshman's entrance ceremony, and then they would like to invite him to give an opening speech. However, the main character said that he came here to report about a strange person. When the deputy heard this, he asked who he was talking about, and Charlie explained that he was talking about Carl of the Mantis tribe. At this point, the deputy said that their academy advocated free love, so there was nothing they could do about it. So Charlie headed towards the exit and said that it looked like he had chosen the wrong academy. However, the man stopped him and said that the fact was that the leader of their tribe had really asked him to accept this girl, and he asked Charlie to put himself in his position. He said he had a place to live there and offered Charlie to stay there until Carla calmed down. After some time, the main character went to the room, the keys to which the deputy gave him. He opened the door, but what he saw inside shocked him. Waiting for him inside was Natalie, who smiled widely as soon as she saw her son at the door. The protagonist screamed in horror, asking her what she was doing in the deputy's house. As it turns out, Natalie found out that Carla was stalking him, so she bought the house and handed over the keys through the deputy director. Natalie also said that she was afraid that if she gave the keys to Charlie directly, the girl would notice. She knew that sooner or later Charlie would get into trouble and end up in the deputy's office, so she left the keys with him. Then the main character asked her where she got the money for all this. The woman explained that it was his money, and the house was registered in his name, so that in the future he would have a place to bring his wife. What irritated Charlie most about this situation was that, while he was in his own house, he would be forced to sleep in the living room since Natalie would be living there too. When the woman heard this, her eyes lit up with a furious light and she picked up a knife. Seeing this, Charlie was very scared and explained that he did not expect such happiness, and he only dreamed of sleeping in the living room. After this, Natalie calmly headed to another room. Charlie soon decided that it was okay to sleep on the couch, but when he got rich, he would buy himself a king-size bed and lock all the doors to the bedroom. A week later, the main character had already become famous throughout the academy, and his portraits hung on every wall. Julia was very pleased that her brother was doing so well and becoming so popular. Charlie noted that being popular is very difficult, and he preferred to just be given money. He said that the money was a reward for the winner of the league, and these people had not yet calculated how much he should receive for closing the portal and killing the demon. Soon the main character was intercepted by the organizers of the competition to tell him what he should do after going on stage. At that moment, Julia felt as if her brother was moving away from them. Natalie explained to her that Charlie was a difficult guy, and Julia should understand this. Moreover, no matter how far apart they become, they are still one family. When Julia heard this, she asked her mother if she had finally accepted Charlie as her son. The woman replied that this was the only thing she could do for him as payment for his saving her. After some time, all the rules were explained to the main character, and after that he looked incredibly tired. However, he told his deputy that he was very well prepared. At that moment, the stage announced that they would like to invite the winner of the league, the slayer of the 7th level demon, and the protector of the city who sealed the gate. Before going on stage, he received another piece of advice that he shouldn't be nervous, and that he shouldn't forget to praise the academy. After this, the main character came out on stage, stood near the microphone and looked at the piece of paper on which his speech was written. He said that he would like to thank the academy because countless talented guys came out of its walls, and the founder was a very virtuous person. He then said that the man and his lover wanted to convey something to the students, but he already knew what they wanted. At that moment, Carla stood behind the scenes, dressed in her armor, ready to attack the main character at any moment. However, suddenly Natalie appeared behind her and suggested that they have a little chat. Carla asked her if she was there to steal her loot, and Natalie replied in the affirmative. As soon as the girl heard this, she immediately grabbed her blades and rushed at the woman. However, Natalie broke her blades with one blow of her spear and forced her to retreat. She said that they should resolve the situation according to her clan's customs, which was that the loser would retire and die. At one point, Carla froze in place, as the spear was a centimeter from her face. Then she realized that she needed to escape from this situation and turned back. Before Natalie could do anything, Carla opened the window and ran outside. The woman then breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that the problem had been solved. At that moment, Charlie appeared behind her and asked what problem she was talking about. Natalie explained to him that that girl would not bother him anymore. Charlie was incredibly happy about this, because it turned out that all he needed to do was find someone who would give her a good beating. Then Natalie explained that apparently she had switched to her, because the Bogomolov clan relies on competition when choosing a partner. The loser is obliged to give up his rights to the chosen partner, but this does not prevent him from challenging the winner again. In other words, she won't bother Charlie until she defeats Natalie, so from that day on he has to behave well, or she will lose and be upset with his behavior. After hearing this, the main character thanked his aunt for her help and said that he needed to make a call. He went outside and called Camilla. At some point, he began to worry that she couldn't survive that fight with Carla. However, the girl said that she did not lose. Charlie was glad to hear her voice and said that the main thing for him was that she was okay in the end. Then the girl suddenly screamed, saying that she had not lost and was not going to give up. Suddenly, the main character's younger sister appeared behind him and put her hands on his shoulder. Then she pointed to the assembly hall and said that the teachers had announced a test of the newcomer's strength, and he also had to pass a small test. Then the protagonist went to the reception desk, and the girl who was sitting there asked him what his virtue was. He explained that he was good at attracting death. The girl was unhappy and said that she asked about his merits, not his shortcomings. Charlie scratched his head and said he was pretty good at attacking. Then the girl asked him to take a test. She explained that it is the basis for forming teams of equal strength and asked him to give it his all. Then the main character went to the office where the physical fitness testing was taking place. He opened the door and saw that a man was already waiting for him inside. It was a lion man, and as soon as he saw Charlie, he said that he was pretty well built, and it looked like he would have to put in more effort this time. He then broke the stick he was holding and said that they would set a small goal to start with, 30 seconds. He asked Charlie in advance not to blame him for anything, because elders will always be stronger, and he must experience the cruelty of society. He then charged forward using a punch. He used a triple punch, but Charlie didn't even budge. At some point, an unusual aura enveloped him, and Leo did not understand what was happening to him. He thought that it all looked somehow wrong. Taking advantage of his confusion, Charlie struck him in the chin. Soon, the girl sitting at the table said that the subject lasted only 21 seconds. He couldn't even last 30 seconds with his rating. However, other participants noted that it didn't seem to be the guy's fault. When the girl turned around, she saw that the instructor had actually been injured during the testing. After this, Charlie came out of the office and asked if he had passed the test. The girl frantically signed his certificate. She bowed to him and said that these were his results and direction. As he walked away, she glanced at his back, thinking that there were a lot of C-rated kids this year, and she didn't know if this guy would live to graduate. After some time, the main character came to the office where the members of Group S were located. When he walked inside, everyone immediately greeted him. However, the other students met him with dark looks, as if they saw a sworn enemy. Then suddenly surprise appeared on their faces, and they greeted the teacher in chorus. At this point, the protagonist smirked and thought that it was their mistake, and they couldn't blame him for it, and then walked up to the podium where the teacher was supposed to be standing. He began his speech by saying that they, the students of Class S, would receive more resources and achieve unprecedented success. But in return, they would be expected to give the same amount of effort. The students were very excited and listened to every word of their so-called teacher. However, at that moment, a petite girl with short pink hair appeared in the doorway. Charlie turned to her with displeasure and said that she was late. After that, he started yelling at her, saying that he wanted her to admit her mistake and explain herself. Because she was a student and had to admit that she was wrong in this situation, he asked her name and who allowed her to contradict the teacher. Then the girl adjusted her glasses and said that her name was Leah, but everyone addressed her as teacher. When the main character realized that a real teacher was standing in front of him, surprise appeared on his face. Then the woman came up to him and said that it was now his turn to answer questions, and asked what the name of their new teacher was. After waiting for no answer from Charlie, she asked him to return to his seat, and he immediately ran to the stands. As he sat down in his seat, his classmates looked at him with murderous looks, realizing that he had deceived them. Soon Leah started her lesson, and said that their academy emphasizes working in groups. Each group will have 4 people, an attacker, a second attacker, a support, and a healer. She said she would give the kids some time to get to know each other and split into teams. The students immediately rose from their seats and shouted that they were ready. At this moment, the main character spoke up and asked the teacher if she would like to work with him. The girl said that she almost forgot that there was an odd number of students in the group, so one of them would have to join the special team. The rest of the students began to mock Charlie, saying that the special team was the scum of the school that everyone hated. But the protagonist realized that their attitude only made him stronger. So he immediately jumped up from his seat, raised his hand and said that he would like to join a separate team. He then stormed out of the office and asked Leah not to worry about him, as he would definitely do everything so that she would not be ashamed of him. After some time, he arrived at the tower, entry to the territory of which was prohibited. At that moment, a stranger approached him from behind and asked if he knew what this place was. Charlie assumed that this guy wanted to stop him, but he had no intention of doing so. At that moment, the stranger came close to him and put his hand on his shoulder, asking if he was ignoring him. The stranger looked closely at the protagonist's face and noted that he did not look like a fool. However, instead of answering, Charlie swung his fist at him and said that, apparently, the problem was in him. Before his fist could even touch the man's face, he activated a skill called Lu Wei's Golden Technique. His entire body was enveloped in an impenetrable shield that did not let through any blows. Charlie then stepped back and noted that this guy's strength was very similar to his own. Meanwhile, the man jumped on the protagonist and began to strike him one blow after another, while Charlie covered himself with the help of his armored hands. He decided to use the demon's power boost since he needed to confront this guy. Taking advantage of the opportune moment, he struck him straight in the face. The blow from his huge fist was so powerful that the man was simply thrown back. He slammed into the wall with all his might, causing cracks to appear on it. The protagonist was surprised, because even Karos could not withstand such a strong blow. He realized that this guy seemed to have the strength of an assassin class, and he decided that he could really become stronger in this place. The man thought to himself that he just wanted to ask what grade the guy was in, but the guy suddenly decided to pounce on him. He assumed Charlie was just trying to impress him, but he had picked the wrong target to do so. The man was intent on teaching him what respect for a teacher was, and Charlie was intent on learning something new. So he summoned his hammer hands and struck the stranger. However, the man easily dodged the blow and instead punched Charlie in the stomach. In response to this, the main character only grinned and asked him if this was really all he was capable of. At that moment, he felt that the internal organs in his body were starting to tear. Before he could do anything, blood gushed from his mouth. Then the teacher pounced on him again and struck him again with his fist. The main character could only cover himself from the numerous blows that were flying in his direction. At that moment, the teacher realized that his attacks could not penetrate this guy's defense. Meanwhile, Charlie was thinking that if things continued as they were, nothing would come of it. So he had to resort to trickery. He grabbed the teacher's hand, but the man just grinned and said that this was kindergarten, and then lunged at him with his second fist. At that moment, a huge third hand grew out of the main character's back and hit the teacher on the head, driving him into the floor. After this, Charlie continued to strike using all three hands. The man thought to himself that this attack was incredibly powerful. He then summoned his inner strength, and a golden knife appeared on his hand. Taking advantage of the opportune moment, he hit the protagonist in the chest. At that moment, he noticed something strange. He realized that this guy had suddenly removed his protection. Finding himself without his hands, which were cut off by a dagger, stone spikes grew on his hands, and Charlie said with a smile that a pair of fists would be the best reward for him. After that, he began to beat the teacher with stone fists. The impact was so strong that the man flew back again and crashed into the opposite wall. At that moment, it was as if a wave of energy hit his body. Soon, a girl, a dragonfly, appeared near the man. She turned to the teacher and asked if she should report this to the security service. Charlie noticed that she had given him a drink and said that using power-ups was prohibited. A moment later, the teacher stood up, ran up to Charlie and grabbed him by the clothes. He said that he dared to beat up a teacher on his first day of school, and that he could get him expelled right then and there. Charlie realized that the teacher guessed this. Because the man held up well in battle, he thought that he could learn a lot from him. At this point, the teacher noticed that other people were watching them and ordered them to appear. Several waves of energy appeared in the room, and soon animals appeared. The lizard stated that he had bet that the new guy would not last a minute, but now he admits his defeat. The guys approached the main character and said that although their plan did not go as expected, they were still happy. But Charlie needed to train more. Now they needed to introduce themselves to each other. The people introduced themselves one by one. They were all third-level warriors. The girl was good at speed, the chameleon guy was good at spying, and the frog guy was good at defense. Charlie also introduced himself, saying that he was a first-level warrior and could take a beating well. When the boys heard this, they were surprised to learn that he was indeed a first-level warrior. At this moment, the dragonfly girl hit them on the head and said that the strength of the demon clan is measured differently. The more demons work together, the stronger they are. But they could count how many abilities this guy had already demonstrated. The teacher looked at the team and noted that they had an assassin, a scout, a protector, and a demon. but without a healer, they would have a hard time. At that moment, a girl entered the room and asked if this was class number 8. The boys answered in the affirmative. However, Charlie asked them why they were lying, since it was class number 7. Then the teacher entered the conversation. He grabbed the main character by the neck and threw him out of the tower, saying that class number 7 was in another place. While the main character was flying down, he counted the number of floors. There were 13. He then flew past the floor the man was on and warned him to step aside, as he was not prepared to take responsibility for a possible collision. However, the person did not move away. As it turned out, it was Carla, on whose body the main character landed. He was quite heavy, and his weight knocked the girl off her feet. Seeing him, Carla pulled him towards her and said that now was not the best place for such games. When Charlie realized who was in front of him, he jumped up sharply and rolled to the side, but again collided with someone who was behind him. He felt like he had hit a flat wall. When he turned away, he saw Julia standing behind him. The girl was very offended by his words about the flat wall, and she hit him, saying that he should not have used such analogies. After this, the main character flew down again. However, Natalie caught him at the bottom, and this could not but please him. She explained that, at the honorary invitation of the academy, she was appointed as a teacher of class number 7. The first question she was interested in was why he called her daughter a flat wall. She stuck him out of the window and started threatening that if he answered incorrectly, she would just throw him down, at which point Charlie grabbed her with all his strength. When the conflict was over, he decided to introduce the girls to each other. First, he introduced Natalie, saying that she was a specially hired teacher. Julia introduced herself by saying that she was a 3rd-level warrior and was in the Night Reserve. Then Carla introduced herself, saying that she was a 3rd-level warrior from the Mantis tribe. She turned to Natalie and explained that she was her opponent. The woman cast an angry glance in the direction of the protagonist, and he pretended not to understand anything. Then he also decided to introduce himself, saying that he was a 1st-level warrior from the Demon Clan. However, when Natalie heard this, she hit him with all her strength, and he flew into the wall. She said that the girls should have noticed that they were still missing one person in the class. At first, she wanted to apply for a healer, but unfortunately, there were no more such candidates. So she asked if they had any friends who could do the job, to which Carla replied that the Mantis clan didn't need friends. Then Charlie asked her to be honest that no one really wanted to be friends with her. At this point, Carla turned her attention to him and once again reminded him of her desire to have offspring from him, which made Charlie stick his head into the hole in the wall again. Then Natalie approached him and asked if she had a suitable companion. Charlie said with a smile on his face that he had someone in mind. The woman was surprised and asked if he could find a healer for them. Charlie assured them that he could do it. He said that if they needed a healer, he would bring one immediately. Meanwhile, the dog sisters tried to calm Camilla down, telling her that she shouldn't compare herself to that horrible praying mantis. However, Camilla asked them not to calm down, saying that she would stay away from Charlie until she defeated this girl. At that moment, the main character entered the classroom and immediately greeted Camilla. As soon as the girl saw him, she jumped up from her place and wagged her tail. Charlie asked her why she was in the classroom, and he had been looking for her for so long and she hadn't picked up the phone. He was surprised that with her great abilities, she hadn't gotten into Class S. At that moment, the girls' classmates turned their attention to the guy, and anger appeared on their faces. One of them approached Charlie and asked what was good about Class S, adding that he shouldn't get cocky, since their class was no different from his. In response to this, the main character simply began to pick his nose. He then threw what he had taken out of his nose with all his might, right towards the guy who had decided to argue with him. He turned to him again and asked if he was sure of his words. Instead, the guy ran out of the office as fast as he could, not wanting to argue with this strange guy anymore. Then Charlie approached Camilla and asked why she didn't answer his calls. The girl started waving her arms and said that she was here for her sisters. However, Charlie didn't want to listen to this. He grabbed her hand and said that he needed her in another class. Camilla looked at his face in surprise, not believing what he said. In her eyes, it all looked like he was asking her out. An embarrassed smile appeared on her face and she said that they were still too young for that. At that moment, a wolfman entered the office and asked why it was so noisy here. He asked the guys to be quieter. After that, he turned his attention to Charlie and asked him who he was. The main character replied that he was a student of Class S. After this, the wolf noticed a dent in the wall and asked what he was doing there. Charlie said he had been collecting this booger in his nose since he was born, so no one could stop it. The wolf told him that the price of this wall was 500,000 and asked if Charlie could afford such amounts. After that, he approached the hero and said that he expected compensation from him. At that moment, Charlie thought that if Natalia found out that he had to pay 500,000 for the wall, he would be in trouble. He then explained to the wolf that he was a teacher of Class S and was here to pick up Camilla, and that the costs for the wall would be covered by the academy. However, the wolf doubted that this guy really belonged to Class S. The protagonist stated that he was a 7th grade mentor with the codename Steel Bull. After that, he took Camilla in his arms and said goodbye to the wolf once again. However, the wolf said that he had seen through his deception and now intended to teach him a lesson. Finally, Camilla apologized to the teacher, but she had no other choice. She put a huge stone wall in front of the wolf so that he could not follow them. After some time, they arrived at the tower, and Charlie introduced Natalie to Camilla, saying that this was the same witness. The girl looked at her and greeted the teacher. Natalie sighed in displeasure and asked since when she became a warrior healer. In response to this, Charlie smiled and said that it happened at the moment when they needed a healer. However, Natalie was furious about this whole situation, and she hit him with all her might. She thought to herself that they had a scouting genius and a healer, and that was a pretty strong team. All they had to add was a good plan. So she turned to the team members and said that the first lesson would be that they needed to learn to cooperate in combat. She pointed at Charlie and said that before they left the classroom, they had to knock him down. When Camilla and Julia heard this task, delight appeared on their faces, but Carla immediately began to carry it out. She appeared right in front of Charlie as he tried to escape and told him to stop because his life should belong to hers. She enveloped him with her magic, forcing him to stop. Carla said that although she needed him, he didn't necessarily have to be alive. After that, she used the net on him, and then Charlie realized that he was forced to defend himself. He summoned his huge fists, deciding to forget about warrior etiquette, and rushed at the girl. The blow was so strong that she was thrown far to the other side of the court. She then fell backwards onto the ground, apparently no longer able to fight. After this, Charlie rushed towards her to finish her off, asking her not to blame him for excessive cruelty. However, suddenly he felt that his whole body was bound in chains. When he turned around, he saw Camilla running towards him. At this moment, he decided to use the body expansion skill to get rid of the chains. In just one instant, his body grew several times in size, and 2 additional arms appeared behind his back, causing all the chains that were wrapped around him to immediately crack. He then rushed at Camilla, who froze in surprise at what she saw. At the last moment, she put up a high stone wall in front of her for protection. However, it was not difficult for Charlie to break it with one blow and pin the girl to the ground. Julia, who was watching everything, was scared. She was surprised at how strong Charlie had become, despite the fact that they were all students in the same S class. However, she decided not to give up, and as soon as she realized that Camilla was knocked out, she immediately rushed into battle. She sent out Wolf Fury and was ready to attack Charlie with her foot. She began to strike him one blow after another, but the main character stood still. Camilla and Carla watched in amazement as they watched what was happening on the battlefield. It seemed as if Julia's attacks were doing absolutely no damage to the protagonist. They doubted that she would be able to defeat him. At one point, Charlie grabbed Julia's leg, forcing her to stop. Then he threw her with all his might against the opposite wall. When Natalie realized that her daughter was in danger, she immediately stopped the test and asked all team members to stand in a line. She said that not only do the girls not know how to work as a team, but they are also much weaker than Charlie, so they definitely can't be called a team. She said that the main task for them now was to get acquainted with each other's abilities as quickly as possible, and then gave them weapons, saying that they would use them for more specialized training. Hearing this, Carla became indignant and said that she was from the Mantis tribe and did not need training. When Natalie heard this, she chuckled and said that they could take up real weapons and asked Charlie to fight the girl again. However, when Carla looked at the protagonist, she decided to take her words back. However, at that moment something flew into the protagonist's hand, and he realized that it was a hidden attack. When he looked closer, he realized that it was an egg. Natalie said that their problems are that they only use brute force. They need to take an egg and try to practice with it, and when they can hit the wall without breaking it, then they can consider their training complete. The woman said she would simply monitor the training to adjust the workouts. Charlie was indignant and asked how she managed to throw so many eggs and at such a speed. When he found himself pinned to the wall, he asked her if she really thought this method would work. Instead of answering, the woman silently pointed her finger towards his stomach. When Charlie looked down, he saw that there was an egg on his stomach that was not broken. Suddenly, energy began to envelop him, and he realized that this was the first step to becoming even stronger. Suddenly, he felt the floor beneath him begin to crack. Soon after, the team headed outside to practice again. Natalie watched closely as her daughter's training progressed. She noted that Julia's reaction time was slower, causing her to not act as quickly as usual. Natalie was unhappy because she thought Julia would do much better. Soon, Carla informed Natalie that she had completed her training. Meanwhile, Charlie was practicing in his apartment. He realized that this trick with eggs was not so easy to turn. He had been doing it for the last few days, and now he himself smelled like a raw chicken egg. But he finally succeeded. After that, he sat down on the floor and decided to see how his indicators had changed. He opened the system and realized that he had acquired several new skills at once. At that moment, Natalie entered the room and threw some paper in his face, saying that since he had already studied everything, he needed to try something new. She said that the academy would systematically send missions for which a reward would be provided. Natalie found something interesting for Charlie. If he absorbs the combat abilities of long-range fighting, it will be good for him. Charlie said he would carry out the mission immediately, and Natalie asked him to stop clowning around and head to the mission site now, since he wasn't the only one who knew about it. As soon as Charlie heard this, he immediately jumped out of the window, saying that he would not give this mission to anyone. He landed right where Julia was standing, startling her. However, the main character did not pay attention to her and ran to the right place, shouting that this mission would be his. Carla, watching him, noticed that he had become faster and stronger again. Meanwhile, a small bus was driving along the Serpentine Road. The driver said that although he was accompanying them on the mission, he would not take part. Suddenly, one of the passengers pointed to a flash in the sky directly in front of them and said that they needed to lie down. However, before they could do anything, a sudden flash of light hit the bus directly and exploded it. As a result, all passengers fell out of the bus, which overturned on its side, and were barely conscious. At that moment, a sniper was sitting on top of a nearby tower and watching them through a scope. He aimed straight at the commander, and soon the boys heard the sound of a shot. However, at that moment, someone's hand appeared right in front of the man's face. As it turned out, it was the boy's teacher who intercepted the bullet flying towards the guy. At this moment, the sniper felt disappointed in his failure. He said in his headphones that he had failed the task, and that there was a master among the opponents. After this, he jumped from the tower before he could be discovered. Then the disciples turned to their teacher and asked if their mission had failed, since he had to take action. The man said that it was not their fault, since the enemy's strength was obviously greater than that stated in the mission. However, it was too late to turn back. The students said that the teacher taught them to do everything possible, and sooner or later they would still have to go beyond their own capabilities. The teacher said that he had passed on the information about what had happened to the academy. They should send a team to them, and the students had about 3 hours before they arrived. Then the boys firmly decided to follow him forward. Meanwhile, the sniper was already in the city, while someone followed him. It turned out it was the main character. He told the sniper that he was too fast, and he had to chase him for about 10 miles in one breath. The man turned to him and asked incredulously who he was. Charlie said he was his distant relative, the Horned Devil. He thought to himself that while he was stalking, he had become convinced that this guy was definitely acting with someone else, and he needed to catch all of his accomplices to get a bigger reward. Then the sniper suddenly turned around and said that he had no distant relatives. However, Charlie remained firm and asked him not to be so indifferent and to discuss the matter with him. Instead of answering, the sniper held a rifle to his head and said that if he continued to talk nonsense, he would kill him. Before the main character had time to react in any way, a loud shot rang out. The sniper was sure that he had hit his opponent, since he was literally in front of him. However, when he looked closely at Charlie, he realized that the wound on his head had healed in literally a second. Charlie smiled and asked the sniper why he did it. The guy was horrified and froze with his mouth open. Then Charlie rushed at him, saying that he had done nothing to him, but he dared to shoot at him. He intercepted the sniper's rifle and aimed it towards his shoulder, shooting him. The man screamed in intense pain and said that he had no other choice. He suddenly jumped away from the main character and started shooting at him with a weapon. He fired one shot after another with a machine gun, saying that this was payment for the fact that he dared to hit him. However, these shots did not cause any damage to the protagonist, and he told the sniper to call him Daddy. He then suddenly tore several tree trunks out of the ground and rushed towards the enemy. The sniper realized that he was dealing with a high-level devil. At this moment, the main character noticed that in addition to the sniper, another person appeared who saved him from the attack at the last moment. As it turned out, his guess was correct, and the sniper had an accomplice. The man then went down to the protagonist and said that, as representatives of the same race, it would be best for them to discuss the situation. However, Charlie simply hit him with a tree trunk, saying that they had nothing to talk about. After he had received enough energy from his opponents, he realized it was time for him to finish. Charlie began to look around and realized that he could no longer see the sniper. His opponents suddenly announced that they were from the clan of Devilish Souls. Charlie thought that these were the same guys who parasitize on others, taking possession of their souls after death. However, what was hidden behind this, he did not yet know. After this, the men pointed him in the direction and asked him to come with them. They lined up in 2 lines and greeted Charlie with smiles on their faces. Then the main character decided that without entering the tiger's den, he would not get the tiger cub, and agreed to go inside. As he walked through the settlement, the locals looked at him strangely. Soon, he was taken to a place called the village headman's office. Waiting for him inside was an old man from the Soul Demon clan who was a soul hunter. Charlie walked inside and sat down at the chair. The man asked him where he came from and why he had never heard of him. Charlie thought to himself that the man's body was quite weak, so it was no wonder he was captured. The man said that there were not many demons in this area, and he had only heard of one. After that, he looked angrily at the main character and asked if he wanted to tell him something. Charlie felt that the man's aura had become stronger, but he didn't understand how such a weak body could help him in battle and why he decided to directly confront him. At that moment, a green demon entered the room and asked how they could let the horned devil do that to them. When the demon saw that same horned devil in front of him, his eyes seemed to pop out in surprise. Charlie was also extremely surprised when he realized that this guy was still alive. The demon then ordered them to treat him with respect, as they were on his territory, and Charlie had to ask for forgiveness and also call him master. Charlie thought to himself, that he had become much stronger since his last visit to the labyrinth of space and time. At that moment, people in cloaks entered the room and addressed the demon as Mr. Building. However, the demon ordered them to be silent, saying that they were just a bunch of useless idiots who couldn't handle one demon, so the men suggested that Bo should avenge them. At that moment, the demon looked at the main character, who was sitting and smiling. He said that he still had some things to do, so he needed to go. However, before he left, the protagonist grabbed him by the neck and asked him to tell how he chewed, and it would be better to do this while kneeling. He started shaking him from side to side, telling him to call him Daddy from now on. The bald man then turned to Charlie and asked if they knew each other, and then asked Bo how he could not introduce him to this young man. At this moment, the demon was extremely unhappy. But he understood that there was little he could do in this situation. He stated that this man was his former boss, he was one of them, and fought with them against the people, bravely led them into battle, and personally dealt with a large number of enemy troops. The man said that it was a great honor for him, and then asked Charlie why he had come to see them. However, the protagonist said that he had no need for their help, because he was the great demon of desires, and he himself had helped a lot of his fellows. However, he was not used to working for free, so he demanded to be paid for it. The man said he would pay him whatever he said if he helped them carry out their plan. He said that since he and Bo knew each other, he could show him around. After that, they went outside, but the protagonist still felt the strange looks of the locals. He realized that this was the work of a soul hunter. There is only one way to solve such situations. To kill the soul hunter, you need to kill everyone present. So he decided to report this to the academy, so that someone could help him sort out this situation. After some time, a group of students led by their teacher arrived at this place. The teacher received a message that the situation had changed, and there was a trap here, so they needed to retreat. The students were surprised. They said that they had just arrived and did not want to retreat. But the teacher said that he did not have time to explain this, and they had to run away from there. However, before they could leave the shelter, they were attacked by an external threat. At the very last moment, the teacher put up a protective barrier. However, enemy shells continued to attack, destroying the barrier. The fragments of the barrier flew towards the sniper who was attacking from outside. But at that moment, a demon appeared in front of the sniper and protected him from the shrapnel with his body. The demon absorbed all the fragments, giving the teacher and students time to retreat. When the smoke cleared, the sniper discovered that his enemies were no longer there and ordered an immediate pursuit. At this time, the students were running through the forest, but the demons had already caught up with them. The teacher ordered not to stop and to run at full speed. At that moment, the sniper took aim at the teacher and asked if he cared too much about his students. Before the bullet could pass through his forehead, the teacher put up a new protective barrier. Then he called 1,000 birds and sent them against the enemies. Soon the students saw all their opponents lying unconscious on the grass. The teacher told them not to look back and to keep running. The students followed his advice, realizing that they could not let their teacher down. But soon a silhouette appeared in front of them, coming out of the forest, and they put out their weapons for self-defense. It was Charlie who, upon seeing the students, declared that he was not chasing them in vain. He asked them not to be nervous, claiming that he was on their side. One of the students was surprised to recognize Charlie. Then they realized that this was the same student who had given the strange speech to the freshmen. Charlie said that his words hurt him so much that he forgot where to go, and now the students have to comfort him in his mental anguish. He said he wanted 500 from each and that he wouldn't haggle. After each student had transferred money to him, Charlie continued walking down the path. However, when they heard a strange sound behind them, they turned around and saw their teacher barely standing on his feet. Charlie warned that if they had another teacher, they would have to pay another 1,000 for him. The students were surprised and asked why he raised the price. The teacher intervened and asked who it was. The students explained that it was a freshman representative named Charlie. The teacher approached Charlie and said that he had heard a lot about him. However, Charlie replied that money sometimes speaks louder than words. Instead of money, the teacher plunged his sword into Charlie's body. The teacher told the students that this was not the real Charlie. As it turned out, it really was a monster. The teacher explained that he had received information from the academy that the real Charlie was now collecting information elsewhere. He told the disciples that now they could only rely on themselves. At that moment, one of the students grabbed the sword and plunged it straight into the teacher's chest. He laughed and thanked the man for the valuable information. The other students realized that this was not their partner, but a soul hunter. The guy laughed and, looking at his partners, decided what to do with them. Meanwhile, the main character was walking around the city with the demon. At this moment, he received a message that the advance party had been completely destroyed. He began to guess that they had been discovered by an enemy unit. In addition, the number of demons tracking him had increased. It seemed that his identity had been exposed. Luckily, he had gotten the key information. The next step was to wait for an opportunity to escape and let the academy sort things out. After some time, military personnel and military equipment arrived at the scene. There were so many explosions that the main character had no choice but to escape from them. He received a message that they were going to bomb the village and burn it down. But Charlie didn't understand why he was only being told about it now. Suddenly, he noticed Bo opening a manhole in the middle of the street and trying to get into it. He immediately ran after him, but the demon did not wait for him. However, the main character decided that in this situation he could not give up. He climbed into the hatch after the demon, watching as the military approached the locals. Meanwhile, Bo was walking down the stairs, unaware that Charlie was following him. The protagonist grabbed him from behind and put a knife to his throat, asking what he was looking for there. Bo said that he came here on Charlie's advice, because he himself said that there was a secret passage here. Charlie realized that this demon was being controlled by someone. He pressed the knife even harder against his throat, saying that he wanted to put him out of his misery. However, before he could do anything, the demon's strength left him and he fell to the floor. Charlie heard someone approaching from behind and turned around to see the stranger. It was a man with an identical appearance to Charlie himself. The main character realized that he was a soul hunter. He guessed that the hunter knew who he really was and pretended to kill the guy to lure him out. The soul hunter confirmed this. He said that since everyone already knew his plans, they should lay their cards on the table. The protagonist asked if he was the one who started the pogrom upstairs and killed the people from the academy. The soul hunter replied that Charlie had misunderstood him. He didn't want to fight, but the idiot Charlie had seen was putting everyone in danger with his actions. So he got a chance to speak out against him, which he did. The soul hunter said that if he could obtain Charlie's body and add his abilities to it, he would gain a place for himself in the devil world. At this point, Charlie put on his armor and declared that he did not support such an aspiration. The hunter began to suspect that Charlie was trying to buy time for reinforcements to arrive. Then he used his ability, and Charlie felt his legs become motionless. The hunter stated that he had been waiting for this moment for a long time, and had prepared a special magic circle that would speed up the enslavement of Charlie's body. Charlie realized that there was no point in waiting for salvation and that he had to fight on his own. He used all his strength to lift his feet off the floor, and began to knock down the demons that came to the hunter's aid. However, the hunter stood firm, insisting that they needed to become one. At that moment, Charlie took advantage of the opportunity and struck him straight in the stomach. Despite the fact that the upper part of the hunter's body flew away from the lower part, he continued to say that all this was useless, because he only controlled puppets, and he himself was immortal. Suddenly, the demons surrounded Charlie, not giving him a chance to move. Charlie decided to unleash his power to push back his opponents. The hunter said that he was not the only one capable of growing to gigantic sizes, and that his own abilities were much stronger than Charlie's. However, the hero did not give up and smashed two of the hunter's henchmen's heads together, asking if the hunter really thought so. In response, Hunter only laughed, saying that he was starting to like Charlie. The hero did not stop and continued to beat the demons approaching him. At one point, it seemed to him that he had killed all of the hunter's henchmen. However, suddenly someone's ghostly fist flew into his face. Someone with a translucent body grabbed him from behind and pressed him to himself. Charlie realized he had lost control of his hand. He tried to figure out what kind of ability this hunter had, and at the same time tried to get out of the grip of the invisible creature. But all this was tiring, and it seemed to him that his vision was darkening. He had lost too much blood. As Charlie fell to the ground, Hunter laughed, claiming that he had finally gotten his soul. He was eager to find out what Charlie feared most in the world. Suddenly, Charlie woke up in bed, in the apartment. But this time, he didn't have demonic horns. He looked at himself and realized that everything that had happened to him was just a dream. At that moment, he heard a female voice outside the door. A strange girl said that she shouldn't have married such a monster. She said that she lives with her husband for the sake of the child, but she is tired of enduring the torment and listening to her husband's constant discontent. The system told Charlie that not all children manage to grow up healthy physically and mentally, but he, irritated, ordered the system to shut up, not wanting to read these messages. At that moment, the door to his room opened and a middle-aged woman entered. She grabbed his hand and said that they were leaving here. Charlie realized that these were Hunter's tricks. He admitted that his memory is blurred, and he feels like everything that happened was a dream. And he's not even sure that Natalie and the others really exist. His mother asked him what he was doing, since she was his mother. Charlie explained that he still remembered those who called him trash, and she should stop. After these words, the illusion was destroyed, and Charlie saw that he was holding his own hand. He laughed in the hunter's face, claiming that he had caught him. The hunter was stunned, and asked if Charlie was not afraid of him. Charlie pounced on him, punching him in the face and asking how Hunter dared to use him. The hunter couldn't understand why this guy wouldn't give in to him. Then the spirit came out of the hunter, and he decided that there was no other way out. His strength was exhausted. He needed to retreat and come up with a new plan. Meanwhile, Charlie continued to punch, and Boy came up and told him to calm down because the soul hunter was no longer there. Charlie looked angrily at the place where the hunter had been and asked if he had already escaped. He turned to the demon and asked why he hadn't told him about this before. Charlie assumed that the demon was in league with him and let him get away. The demon asked if they weren't all in the same boat. Charlie pounced on him, saying that if he didn't understand, then he was facing his worst enemy. At this time, one of the workers informed Natalie that 3 squads had thoroughly searched the area, but they still hadn't found Charlie. It seemed like he wasn't there. Natalie apologized and asked to check everything again. Camilla and the rest of the team took part in the search. Julia asked her mother if her brother would be okay. Carla firmly stated that his body would be hers. At that moment, she noticed one of the nurses transporting a wounded man in an ambulance. Carla walked up to them, put her sword to the nurse's throat, and ordered her to let the guy go. The nurse, frightened, said that she was just a nurse and that she was invited here to help people. At that moment, Natalie came up to them and asked what was going on. Carla explained that something was wrong with this situation. Natalie replied that this girl was from the Mantis tribe, and that her intuition could be trusted. The military appeared and threatened to shoot if they did not lay down their arms. The nurse explained that she had just completed her training and had come here for an internship. Carla didn't listen to her and plunged her sword into the body of the man she was leading. She turned to the man, stating that she had already told him that it was better for him to surrender. At that moment, the spirit of the hunter came out of his body and asked the girls if they were ready to sacrifice their comrades. Carla said she missed by a bit, but if it weren't for the strangers, she wouldn't have let him leave alive. In response, the spirit said that she was as ruthless as Charlie, and therefore he would remember her. When Natalie heard Charlie's name, surprise appeared on her face, and she asked where he was now. Soon they arrived at the place where the main character was. A smile appeared on Natalie's face when she saw her son. Carla and Camilla ran up to him, hugged him, and said they were glad he was okay. At this point, Beau said that he was very glad that the girls came here and thus saved him. However, Julia didn't let him say anything, kicked him in the face and told him that he better keep quiet. When they got outside, Natalie told the protagonist that he had done a great job. One of the rockers said with displeasure that this was too superficial a compliment for the contribution he had made. Then Natalie looked at him warmly and passed something to him. After that, they all got on the bus together and went home. Meanwhile, the main character looked at the two glowing spheres in his palm. As it turned out, this was exactly what his aunt had given him. She explained that demons were bred on this stuff, so she had gotten it especially for him. Charlie even wanted to hug his aunt for such a gift, but she did not let him do it. Then Charlie firmly decided that from that moment on, he would consider her his biological mother. Even after his death, he would support her, because she did not do this even for her real daughter Julia. Combined with Charlie's existing abilities, he is now invincible in terms of parasitism, so he decided to try soul erosion right now. However, he suddenly felt Natalie's cold gaze on him and decided that he shouldn't do this. He decided that he should find another goal for training. He then turned his attention to Carla, who was sitting in front of him, and thought that representatives of the warrior races should be resistant to mental attacks. So he used erosion on her. He closed his eyes, realizing that he had managed to connect to the girl, and now he could see what her soul held. However, he saw only her in revealing clothes, waiting for him on the bed, calling her husband. After this, Charlie's eyes widened and Carla asked him if he was really that impatient. She moved closer to him and said that even though such things did not interest her much, if he liked them, then she would support him. Charlie asked her how she knew he had entered her mind. Carla explained that the praying mantis tribe has actually been engaged in spiritual training since childhood. However, suddenly the whole bus began to shake violently and she stopped her story. Outside, they were surrounded by several cars, as well as armed bandits in masks, who said that if the passengers did not get out in 3 seconds, they would take action. Natalie explained to the team that it was the Smiling Masks team, and asked everyone to get ready for battle. Charlie asked who they were, and Carla explained that they were an extremist rebel organization, and that in addition to the smiling ones, there were also crying ones, angry ones, faceless ones, and cold ones. At that moment, someone broke the glass right next to the place where the hero was sitting, and the bandit's hand grabbed him by the clothes. He pulled Charlie outside and said that they would deal with him first. However, when he turned the hero towards himself, he saw that instead of hands he had grenade launchers. Before the bandits could do anything, there was a powerful, deafening explosion. Charlie stood over the bodies of the bandits and suddenly declared that he had not planned to kill anyone today. Then the surviving bandits shouted that the situation had become more difficult, and then rushed to attack. Soon they grabbed Charlie by the arms and decided to deal with him as quickly as possible. In response to this, Charlie just smiled and asked them if they were finished. Suddenly they saw 2 more pairs of arms sticking out of his back, and then they froze in horror, calling Charlie a monster. After this, the hero broke free from their grip and decided to counterattack his offenders. He suddenly began to spin like a fiery whirlwind, scattering everything in his path. Camilla, sitting on the bus, asked him to stop, saying that he was going to destroy everything around him. At that moment, Natalie approached the girls and asked them to get ready for the second lesson. She said that among those people there was a 6th level master. Soon he actually appeared on the battlefield. He was a tiger man, and he looked impressive. At that moment, a stone hand appeared from the ground and grabbed Charlie. As it turned out, his team came to his aid in time. They stood in front of their partner to face the enemy as a team. Seeing this, the tiger only chuckled, saying that now they will see if the girls will survive. Carla immediately jumped into action, telling the man to stop chatting. She was about to strike him with her blades, but noticed that his body was surrounded by a barrier. The tiger then struck back and threw the annoying praying mantis girl away from him. Then Julia and Camilla entered the battle. The tiger thought that this child's abilities were somehow strange, so he decided to deal with the girls first. With one powerful kick, he knocked Julia, who was flying towards him, away from him. He then jumped up, intending to strike her from the air. However, Camilla was determined to stop him and told him not to even think about it. She put a wall in front of him, but the tiger immediately destroyed it. But then Carla appeared in front of him again. Realizing that he was surrounded, the tiger was forced to retreat. Then Charlie finally intervened in the fight and told the tiger with a smile that he had been waiting for him. Before the man could do anything, the hero attacked him from the air using his hands. With one blow, he cut his body in two and landed behind his corpse. After this, there was a powerful explosion, and the entire team headed away from the battlefield. Suddenly, Charlie asked where the explosion came from, and Carla replied that she did it for the show. Meanwhile, those watching the battle noted that the team did quite well. When they returned to the academy, they were all awarded certificates because during their extracurricular activities, they were able to thwart the enemy's plans and break through his ambush. Meanwhile, some students were unhappy with all this, as they thought that this freshman Charlie was too impudent. 3 days later, they met him while he was walking down the street. 4 boys approached him and asked if he dared to accept their challenge. Charlie looked at the boys with a smile and said that he recognized the rooster, the dog, and the monkey, but he couldn't recognize the 4th boy. At that moment, one of them, the wolf, shouted that he was not a dog. Then his friend with green hair calmed him down, saying that this guy loved to piss everyone off, and they should not fall into his trap. Then Charlie said that if they wanted to fight him, he had to warn them that he would not participate in anything for free. In response, the guy shook his fists and said that Charlie had misunderstood him. He introduced himself as Kun Ki from the Peacock tribe. He is a 4th-level warrior. The hero thought to himself that this guy was apparently strong, since his peers were only at level 3. Peacock said that they had heard of Charlie's exploits and had come to ask him for advice. Then Wolf intervened in the conversation and said that it seemed to him that the disruption of the enemy's plans and breaking through the ambush were fictions, and if Charlie really had abilities, then he should accept the challenge. They began to egg him on, saying that he was just scared. At which point the hero thought that they had come here to restore his reputation, which had suffered from his successes. He then said that their medical bills would be completely beyond his means. As soon as the boys heard this, they were surprised at first, and the wolf became furious. Then Peacock said that Charlie had misunderstood them, because they would fight to the death. He said that the one who got rid of the opponent first would win, and Charlie found this idea interesting. Peacock explained that the academy usually gave dangerous missions to the students, like hunting orcs, and such missions would be perfect for their battle. Charlie replied that he had been hunted all his life, and that this was the first time he would be doing it himself. So he immediately asked who the target would be. Peacock was surprised and asked why Charlie didn't ask his teammates about it. The hero replied that he only needed to deal with their company, and for this he did not need partners. At that moment, Peacock realized that these freshmen were not only strong, but also very self-confident. He then said that their target was a martial artist who was last seen at the Redwood Bar on Hanmu Street. They say the bar owner knows him well, so he might have some information. Soon the hero appeared on that very street of Hanmu and entered the bar that he had been told about. He approached the bartender, a raven man, and asked for a bottle of 82 water. However, the man calmly asked Charlie to leave the establishment, as the place was not suitable for him, and instead poured him a glass of boiling water. Charlie asked him not to say such things, because in this world, even women's baths would not stop him. However, Raven stood his ground and asked Charlie once again to leave, or else he would get into trouble.